They say life is what you make it. So what happens if you actually try? What if you actually tried to get your mind right? What if you actually tried to live the high life? What if you happen to die cause life is finite? What if you actually tried to live your best day ever? What if you actually tried to get your mind right? What if you actually tried to live the high life? What if you happen to die cause life is finite? What if you actually tried to live your best day ever? What if you actually grind out when the time's right? What if you actually blinded by your hindsight? What if you actually find out what defines life? What if you actually tried to live your best day ever? I'm getting 1% better every day. I'm getting 1% better every way. I'm waking up every day to a sunny day. No matter what the weather say, life is like a record, so just let it play.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to episode number 9 of Best Day Ever. I'm joined, as always, with Adam Martin. Hey, Adam, how are you doing?
Excellent. Good morning, everybody. Really excited for today's show.
Yeah, we've got a lot to cover, so we're going to be talking about JP Morgan canceling Ye's bank account. I think this is actually a really big story that we're going to get into. We've also got the Alex Jones $1 billion payment that's essentially came out of his most recent trial. Again, it was just under $1 billion, but once you add in the $50 million settlement that he had before, it tips over $1 billion. We're also going to be talking about Joe Biden, the serial liar, but don't worry, the New York Times is going to tell us it's actually folksy. It's like the way your grandpa maybe lies, so you really shouldn't stress too much about when Joe Biden lies to you, but obviously, if Trump exaggerates in any way, he's the devil. So yeah, we've got lots of stories to cover, but before we get into it, let's just kind of touch base. So Adam, any big news, any new updates on your end?
Well, updates from my end. Like, again, I mentioned yesterday, I've been practicing a lot of the sleep updates. But since then, I've also, since our talk the other day regarding cell phones, I've also changed a lot of my settings on my cell phone to remove a lot of my notifications and sort of make my time a lot more productive rather than consumeristic when it comes to my cell phone use. So, if you guys missed that talk, I think it was a really good talk to bring into context, like just how much our cell phones are controlling our time and some of the techniques that are used in order to do that. So definitely a great exploration on that topic. And I've been putting that into practice. So trying to get less than over 1,000 notifications per day directly to my face.
That sounds like a smart plan. And yeah, that's awesome to hear. Again, I really do think those notifications are so detrimental to attention or especially long form attention. It's just such a pattern interrupt. And I think, we're all trained that dopamine hit of wanting to see what someone responded to us with. No major updates on my end, although we did have a bear appear last night at the Citadel. So that was interesting. He was just kind of making the rounds. We've seen signs of bears before at the Citadel, but this was the first time that actually caught one on camera. No doubt about it. He was, only 5 or 10 feet away from the person that took the photograph. So that was interesting. But again, just a black bear. So I don't think we've got too much to worry about because we're not intending to corner him. So I don't think he'll corner us either. But anyways, I want to jump into these WTF stories because I actually kind of feel like I've got two doozies when it comes to these WTF stories. So the first one, as I hinted at earlier, has to do with Kanye West being canceled by his bank. The second one, though, is just as equally interesting in my opinion, and that relates to why, and maybe you guys didn't even realize this, but just about everything costs more in Canada. We actually have some of the highest cost of living here in Canada. It's absolutely wild. And honestly, in my opinion, it's pretty much completely inexcusable. But into it, first one here is Ye. So JP Morgan Chase cancels Ye from using their bank with no reason given, but guess. And I think we can all guess, right? I imagine that they'll point to a lot of his recent social media posts if they're pressured on this. However, we saw him come out wearing the White Lives Matter shirts. We covered that to a certain extent. We talked about how he was on Tucker Carlson. And then finally, he put out a couple of what, most people perceived as being very inflammatory tweets towards Jews. That's the term he used, so that's the term I'll use here. Now, there's a lot to even just unpack in that, but that honestly is almost like the cancel culture trifecta these days, right? Like going against the BLM narrative, right? Being on Tucker Carlson, Fox News, which is evil because that's what the rest of mainstream media tells us, and then finally, being anti-Semitic. And so again, I didn't actually see if he actually ranted and raved. The only tweet I saw come out, and then I think he got banned or shadow banned, was that he was like, "I'm very tired tonight, but tomorrow morning I'm going to go off on the Jews." And again, then he kind of disappeared from social media. I it just Again, if a bank's got a very clear policy about why they're canceling Ye's bank accounts, I can get behind that as long as that was stated from day one. Again, I hope that we'll see a similar backlash against JP Morgan as what we've recently seen in the backlash against PayPal. I haven't checked recently, but we saw PayPal drop 6% the day after they kind of made that goof or that misstatement, depending upon which side of the coin you're on, in regards to wanting to essentially fine people $2,500 whenever they participate in misinformation or essentially anything that PayPal disagrees with. So JP Morgan Chase decided they no longer want to be the Yeezy business. They contacted Ye to tell him he has to take his personal banking elsewhere. His personal banking, keep that in the back of your mind. So this is from Louder with Crowder. Candace Owens, I think, was one of the first ones to really tweet about this. So again, if you guys want to check it out, really encourage you to jump down that rabbit hole. But one thing I want to highlight here is, maybe you're on board with the A being canceled, but it's kind of interesting when you think about maybe some of the other clients JP Morgan hasn't canceled. So this one kind of jumps out to me. JP Morgan kept Jeffrey Epstein as a client despite internal warnings. So while my internet's here, again, let this sink in. So Jeffrey Epstein, pedophile island, working for intelligence agencies, maybe one agency, maybe multiple agencies, but certainly running a pedophile ring off an island seems to be involved with all the elites, or at least the vast majority of the elites. And then we've got Kanye West that put out some tweets that might have hurt some people's feelings. And that's kind of where we are as a society these days. And I honestly find it just shocking that these corporations are so confident in their movements that they don't believe that there will be a significant enough backlash. So they're more scared of cancel culture than they are scared of what I think is like the average American. What are your thoughts on this, Adam?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's obviously disgusting that they would remove somebody like a Kanye West for maybe wearing a White Lives Matter t-shirt or whatever he's done recently that I may have missed in comparison to, maintaining a business relationship and maintaining, connections with somebody like Jeffrey Epstein, who is literally proven to be a serial rapist and child pornographer and, was very, very deep in bed, excuse the pun, with lots of politicians and powerful individuals. Like I just don't know how you could find that excusable. But again, like I think this is part of a broader movement towards this sort of woke mentality. And like we saw the backlash recently, we covered the story with PayPal and their user agreement, and we saw an instant reaction from the market, really hurting their stock price. And social media too lit them up, and they very, very, very quickly reeled back those statements and tried to recover from what had happened. And I wouldn't be shocked if this is what happens here. And I don't know how easy it is to kind of tank Chase Bank's stock, but I could certainly see a lot of people not aligning with these values and perhaps choosing other banks because of this messaging. So I'm glad that we're still able to kind of vote with our dollars.
Mm-hmm. And I think this just serves as a constant reminder, whether we're talking about the PayPal story, whether we're talking about Kanye now, or whatever the next scandal is, or maybe we're looking back to the Canadian government freezing the bank accounts of Canadian protesters. Doesn't matter which example you want to use, this should just serve as a constant reminder that we actually do need to vote with our feet, vote with our dollars. And I saw a lot of Bitcoin maxis coming out on the timeline over the last 24 hours about this, really just speaking out about, again, like, it's not enough to virtue signal anymore. Like, we literally need to be moving with our dollars. I know both you and I, Adam, are big fans of Dave Smith and his podcast, Part of the Problem. Recently, he had, I think it was Guy Swan, but one of the Swan brothers on his podcast talking about how, Bitcoin can play in to try and actually solve or fix some of these problems. And what Guy's answer was essentially was, you need to start saving in Bitcoin today, spend in fiat, and eventually we all need to look towards migrating more and more towards opting out of our existing financial systems. Because again, it's not enough, in my opinion, to even try and like shame them on social media. It's not enough when they take 2 steps forward and then 1 step back, because that's often what we see, right? So again, PayPal took 2 steps forward, then took 1 step back. So they were like, we're going to get you for misinformation, for this, that, and the other. And then they stepped back on the misinformation part a little bit. And we're going to get into this in another story later on in the show. But this just serves as another example of how the deep state, in my opinion, because again, I don't think JP Morgan made this in isolation. I wouldn't be shocked to learn if, other powerful individuals or entities leaned on them in order to get this sort of result. There's no immediate state connection here, but in lots of cases there are. And this, again, just like whether we're talking about shadow banning, whether we're talking about people being pushed out of the financial system, whether we're talking about just the inconveniences that we've even experienced over the last couple of years in regards to personal medical choices, there's a lot of ways the states can infringe upon our rights in the modern era without necessarily literally putting us in shackles and putting us in a cell in the basement. Because again, I think that there's often a misnomer here that, in this form of capitalism, oh, it's okay. Like, you know what? This is the free market doing as the free market wishes. But no, understand that you and I tomorrow, Adam, can't just go and open up our own bank. There's layers and layers of regulation, huge fees associated with it. So again, there are these giant barriers to entry. And then we find that the individuals that currently have these, whether you, in some cases like monopolies, plutocracies, or whatever it happens to be, right? And there's a wide variation in regards to the different types of oligarchies we have in our almost any industry these days, but we don't actually operate in a truly free market where we could simply just start a new Twitter tomorrow if we wanted to, or we could just start a new bank. We could just start a new airline if we so chose. Again, under the purest form of like anarchy or libertarianism, that would be the case. In individual corporations, I'd have no issue with them making different decisions, right? Like if you wanted to be like, anyone that retweets Fox News is banned from my bank, I don't have an issue with that as long as there's no monopolistic tendencies towards regulation around the banking system. But obviously, that's not the case, and that's not where we find ourselves currently. The next story I wanted to jump over to here, this is from the National Post, the Canadian premium, all things that cost more in Canada than anywhere else on Earth. And yeah, I think anecdotally speaking, most of us are aware of a few of these things, but when you start to really lay it out, it actually becomes kind of overwhelming how we pay more for just about everything in Canada than other countries. And then again, reminder here, we also pay a shit ton in taxes. So it's not like, oh, well, you pay a lot more, but you don't have to pay for taxes, or there's some sort of caveat there. And again, one other interesting little tidbit or point I want to make here before we get into the article is like, again, America, they also have high taxes. Usually you're going to find yourself in a net lower tax bracket unless you're maybe in a New York or a California. But they're also like the world's military police. And so a lot of their GDP and a lot of their funds go towards that. Canada, like, what's our excuse? I honestly think it's just bureaucracy and waste. Most times is what's actually going on in crony capitalism.
It's
so
certainly
the first
not
one,
the roads.
yeah, it's not any of our services, that's for sure. The first item here, cell phone charges. I don't think this will surprise anyone. This is a reoccurring thing amongst most, average Canadians that I talk to, but understand that in most of Europe, it can cost as little as $30 for a monthly cell phone plan with 100 gigabytes of mobile data. In Canada, that kind of plan would run $144, according to the Finnish telecom analyst Rewheel. Prices in the Canadian wireless market continue to be the highest or among the highest in the world, they wrote in 2021 report. And there's really no good justification for that, particularly when you think about, again, the essential monopoly, right? 90% of the market's controlled by 3 entities. That's TELUS, Rogers, and Bell. And they get all kinds of government subsidies, all kinds of government handouts, and all kinds of favorable policies around them in order to operate in Canada. And yet they also charge these just insane amounts. Next one is air travel. So take Air Canada or WestJet, and this is in regards to like 100 kilometers of travel. 100 kilometers of travel would cost $123.52. In the US, meanwhile, even a full service airline would only run $23.55. So again, this is almost like a 5 times premium that we're paying here in Canada versus what they're paying in the United States when it comes to air travel. And I, again, like, we've got Air Canada that gets bailout after bailout. We throw all kinds of taxpayer dollars towards these entities. They continuously seem to somehow lose money, and yet we also pay the highest amounts in the developed world in regards to air travel.
Well, and this isn't going to get any better either with the proposed carbon taxes and increases to taxes on this type of transportation. Like this in fact is going to go up, right? We're adding taxes currently to this type of transportation and all forms of fossil fuel transportation right now. Like, this is not going down, despite this being a known problem.
Adam, technically, I shared this story on my Instagrams, but we just saw, I think it was Air Canada is committed to purchasing a bunch of airplanes that are electric oriented that can travel up to 200 kilometers in distance.
Oh, thank God.
That'll solve all the carbon tax problems, I'm sure. Because obviously in Canada, we're so close together that 200 kilometers, you can travel just about anywhere in Canada.
Hey, by the way, I have a Tesla, and if it gets below 10 degrees, which every fucking airplane operates in, it's absolutely useless and loses all of its range. So I'm really glad we've solved that problem.
Mm-hmm. And then looking at healthcare, except in the United States, of course, according to this article, when we're looking at Canada's costs, that's right. Even in a land where people are dying in emergency rooms and millions don't have a family doctor, healthcare is still costing us more than almost any other society on the planet. So when we look at healthcare spending as a percentage of GDP, Canada, we throw out some of the most dollars towards that, and yet we actually don't get a lot in return for it. Again, I can't help but want to jump to conclusions on this and say it's a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of red tape, and a lot of inefficiencies that often comes with the public sector, right? Like, when we actually turn towards the government to solve our problems, that seems to be what we end up getting.
Well, one thing there, and I'm sorry to cut you off, Matt, but one thing too, like, not covered at all with our healthcare is dental. Like, everything is an elective procedure when it comes to dental. And like, just anecdotally, like, I've got a few dental issues right now and just got handed a $13,000 bill by my dentist. So it's like, if you're going to pay taxes like we do, and to the degree that we do, and then claim that it's being spent on healthcare, like, the services you get are nowhere near what you would need to actually cover this. And then even if you made the, okay, well, you could purchase additional health insurance argument, most of the services and procedures covered under health insurance that relate to dental are also going to be for things that are more like emergency services, or capped at very low expenditures for things that actually are going to affect your health, right? Like cavities and the use of like crowns and resins and things like that. These are all going to be elective, despite actually being really closely tied to your health, right? So anyways, I need to point that out too, because I think there's perhaps a misunderstanding from the international community that like everything's covered in Canada and that's why you pay so much. Well, it's not true.
Yeah, $13,000. So did you go with the gold grill, or is it steel with diamond studs?
Yeah, conflict diamonds. And those are the cheap ones too.
The next thing here on the list is motor fuels. So at least in the Western Hemisphere, so when we're looking at North and South America, but Canada absolutely tops the leaderboard when it comes to the Western Hemisphere. There isn't a single other city in the Americas that is fueling their cars with $2.30 a liter petrol, as is the current rate in Metro Vancouver. Now, this one makes sense to me because it's not like Canada produces any oil. Or wait, we actually produce a shit ton of oil. So how does this work again? Can you remind me why we're paying the most when there's other countries in North America? Like, there are island countries in the Caribbean that literally don't have sources of oil, and somehow they still are able to fuel their vehicles cheaper than we are here in Canada.
Perhaps it has something to do with the fact that we extract all of these natural resources, then send them away to the United States to be refined, and then buy them back at a complete loss from these other countries.
Good news is we don't use efficient pipelines to send the oil to the
That is the good news.
So
that is the good news.
We can hang our hat on that. We don't have pipelines in Canada.
Because those could get blown up too by Americans. So
true. Well, actually, I didn't even. This isn't in today's stories, but there was a incursion, I think, on Russian soil, right, where they were trying to blow up the Turkish pipeline for oil or natural gas. I think it's an oil pipeline there. But then milk. So here we are with milk. So Argentinians at first believed they were paying the most in the world for milk, but it turns out they were wrong. So they were almost right. Argentina turned out to be the world's second most expensive country for milk, behind only Canada. Again, this makes sense to me because it's not like we've got a lot of farmland. We don't have a lot of cows or anything like that. But actually, this is exactly like the oil thing, where we actually do produce a shit ton of agricultural products. We actually have all the space in the world for dairy cattle. But it's because of government intervention, right? It's because of the dairy board. It's because of supply chain management from a top-down bureaucracy that we end up paying the most in the world. Like, just think about this, right? We're talking about like travel of every sort, whether air or on ground, is more expensive in Canada. Communications, right? Cell phones. And we didn't get into internet, but internet's also more expensive in Canada than a lot of other developed countries. Like milk, it turns out that almost every category we're paying a lot more as Canadians. And housing, that's also no exception to this rule. So the most recent quarterly data from the OECD shows Canada tied with Portugal and the Netherlands for the worst price to income ratio in the developed world. Like, I kind of get why a bunch of people were really upset this winter when they were told that essentially they were misogynist, racist, and they weren't going to be allowed to do anything in their country, even though we pay more than almost anyone else for the right to be in our country. It
But also,
borders
Matt,
kind of absurd.
But Matt, our houses are made of lumber, and we don't have that here. So of course, it's naturally going to be expensive to build.
Mm-hmm. It truly is just shocking when you actually kind of go through this article and you think about it and you realize, like, why is all this stuff so expensive? Like Canada, like, again, why is housing so expensive? Oh, I guess it's because we've got no space to build, except for we've got one of the lowest population densities in the world, right? We're the second biggest landmass country. It's absurd, honestly, when you're going through this and you're trying to use any sort of rationale in regards to understanding this. And I recently just kind of tweeted or trolled Jagmeet Singh because he just put out a new proposal saying that he was going to fight greedflation. And point two on his 3-point manifesto here, at least on Twitter, to fight greedflation was to close tax loopholes and make sure CEOs pay more in taxes. And my simple question was, how is this going to solve greedflation? Like, do you literally believe that the corporations will pay more in taxes and reduce their prices because you made them pay more in taxes? Like, even if I take you at your word that they're just greedy individuals, what about making them pay more taxes is going to make them want to charge you less? It literally just makes no sense at all. It's just simple attempts at grandstanding, and he's just not even good at it.
Well, the whole NDP party is fucking ridiculous. I'm not going to like that. Maybe we need to have a whole talk to just sort of breaking down the current political parties in Canada, because I think they're all a little absurd at this point. But the NDP has got to be the worst among criminals. I mean, they're just brutal. And absolutely, that's not going to work. And you guys have to realize, too, that like these companies don't act in a vacuum, right? Like if you add taxes, they just dynamically change how they will produce their products or the prices that they'll sell them at, right? Like it's so absurd to think that something like a tax wouldn't just be passed immediately on to the consumer, which just perpetuates your problem and makes everything worse. It's like any type of price controls just affect what the company decides to do. It's amazing. Like this is like literally year one intro to microeconomics or macroeconomics. Like you seriously, the first day of economics, you learn that price controls, quotas, things like that are just going to negatively affect the market and take you away from any type of free market equilibrium price.
And it's wild to think that, again, literally just using this article here, talking about milk and how we pay the most in the world for milk, that they somehow think that if we were to implement similar policies into other aspects of the food chain or the food supply chain, that's going to solve it, right? And even if you're looking at like garbage, highly processed foods, I think I read a recent headline where Pepsi, Frito-Lay, right? Their average price increased by 17% over the last year on their products. It just like, this inflation is going to be far more stickier than what our politicians are currently leading us to believe. And same with the government bureaucrat economists. And I think at some point in time, there's going to have to be a reckoning here. I just don't see how people will put up with this burden just forever. That's something has to give.
But Matt, I think the one of the reasons we find ourselves, and I don't want to go too crazy onto this right now, but one of the reasons we find ourselves here is the pitch sounds so good. The marketing is so good, right? We're protecting Canadian dairy farmers. And that's actually why we need to have these types of quotas, and we need to restrict any type of international markets from coming here, and we need to restrict like raw dairy and all these random things. And it's just like, well, like if we need to protect them so bad, I think we need to have a discussion about whether or not they should be doing the thing that they're doing. And it's just like, I just don't understand how we can make everybody suffer for the needs of a few when it's on such a ridiculous claim that it's going to improve everybody and improve the Canadian economy. It's like everybody paying more doesn't actually help you. Anyways, this protectionism stuff, it just drives me nuts because it's so clearly well defined that if you do it, it will negatively affect the consumer.
All right. Well, those were just our WTF stories, so we haven't even gotten to the main stories of the day. But before we do that, let's quickly hit on some quick recommendations. So I got one for you guys. Zero Hedge. You guys will regularly see me referencing it here in regards to some of the stories we cover. I think even today there's probably 2 Zero Hedge articles I'm going to touch upon. I'm a big fan of Zero Hedge. I think it's one of the better news aggregators out there, particularly if you're looking for like macroeconomic things. Now, like a lot of media these days, like it's got its own political bent. If you were to trust mainstream media and governments, they'll tell you that it's Russian propaganda. But I find it usually to be like there's opinion pieces there, and sometimes the opinion pieces will be quite aggressive in their framing of discussions. But when you're actually looking at like news articles shared, they're usually pretty well researched, pretty well referenced, or at least equally or better than a lot of mainstream articles, in my opinion. So I encourage you guys, if you're looking for another source of news to add to your sources, again, you should never be taking all your news from one source. I think Zero Hedge is a great addition. Adam, any quick recommendations?
Yeah, excellent recommendation there on Zero Hedge. And if you guys have been paying attention, we actually review a lot of their articles. And so I think that's definitely insightful as to where we both stand on that. My recommendation for today kind of relates to the topic we're going to be exploring later in our Best Day Ever show. It is, of course, Thursday, which talks about hobbies and interests. And on today's show, we're going to be talking about the Go Bag. And in relation to the Go Bag, I have a couple recommendations for you guys. One of my favorite channels that I listen to, they have both a podcast and a YouTube channel that I find very exciting. And they're both entertaining and extremely informative. And I think that's important. And they have a ton of credibility in being former ex-Special Forces guys, Green Berets, Navy SEALs. These guys have done it all. And that channel is called the Fieldcraft Survival channel. So Fieldcraft Survival channel. It's a fantastic place where you can go and learn about preparedness. You can learn about everyday carry. You can learn about just some of the things that will help you, your family, your network be prepared in case there are any emergencies or anything that goes on in your life that you weren't exactly planning for. So I think it's a great channel to learn about some of that stuff. You could also brush up maybe just for more pleasure purposes like camping, right? You could learn about different packouts for camping, canoe trips, things like that. So great place to learn from, and some very experienced guys talking about a lot of cool stuff over there. Fieldcraft Survival.
Yeah, definitely recommend you guys check it out. I don't think I've been exposed to them specifically, but I've definitely consumed a lot of content in that niche and always enjoy it. The first article that we're going to jump into, the first story we're going to cover today, this relates to or this is from the Fraser Institute. Again, I really enjoy the Fraser Institute, fee.org, and a handful of others in regards to just getting, sometimes it's easy to get caught up in just the 24-hour news cycle, but it's also important for us to explore, longer term stories. So this first one here from the Fraser Institute, Storm Without End, the economic and fiscal impact of COVID in Canada. So Canada did not escape this fiscal impact of the pandemic. According to the IMF, Canada saw a negative fiscal balance of 10.9% in 2020 and a forecast of 7.5% in 2021 and 2.2% in 2022. However, the pandemic affected the public finances of the federal and provincial governments differently, and they put out like a decent amount of research here. So again, if you guys want to really sink your teeth into this concept, encourage you jump over to the FraserInstitute.org. But along with substantial amounts of income support to individuals and businesses with emergency response benefits, the federal government during the pandemic engineered a substantial increase in its own spending levels that deserves particular attention. The spending forecast in the federal 2022 spring budget shows that, compared to the pre-pandemic fiscal year 2019-2020, total spending in 2022-23 will be about 27% higher, an average annual increase of 9% per year. This means a bigger federal government expenditure footprint. So this is important, right? And during the original pandemic, we were told these were all temporary emergency spending initiatives that were being undertaken by both federal and provincial governments. However, it turns out a lot of this spending is far more stickier than we anticipated. I think I've got a press release here I want to quickly jump over before I get your opinion, Adam. But the point from the press release they released, which I think just really succinctly puts this together, is crucially, approximately 60% of the federal budget deficit during the pandemic from 2020 to 2021 related directly to COVID-19. So that's health spending and transfers and income support to people and businesses, while the remaining 40% was not related to the pandemic. This represents a permanent, long-term increase in federal spending. And so this is the constant complaint you'll hear from libertarians or freedom oriented individuals when discussing government spending is it's so hard for them to ever take back or scale back from their spending. Once a program's set up, right, once someone's put in charge of that program, that becomes their own little fiefdom within the government. And now essentially their job, their department, their future raises all depend on this department usually growing, right? Rarely do you see someone actually being lauded in the public sector because they chose to reduce the size or reduce the scope or reduce the mandate of their organization or department. And again, like COVID is one of the best examples here I can see, right? We can look back to originally when the Income Tax Act was implemented, right? Whether we're looking at Canada or the United States, those were temporary measures to help fight, I believe, World War I, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
But again, we eventually see them always become permanent. Almost anything that's temporary that comes from the state ends up becoming part of the permanent bureaucracy on a long enough time horizon. So, yeah, what are your thoughts here, Adam?
Yeah, just this morning, I was shocked to see that we have issued another $47 million in new military aid to Ukraine. And I just, with all this stuff, I have to wonder, like, at what point was the citizen considered, right? Who actually voted for this? When you voted, if you voted for the Liberal government, were you actually voting for the government to spend, whatever, 27 or whatever you just said, like that much more money every year as a permanent fixture? Is that what was voted for? And if you didn't vote for that government, like at what point does the government consult the people it's supposed to be representing to see what should be spent on? Because like with these numbers, like where does that even go? Like where does it go? Okay, well, let's just say some of it's going to Ukraine right now. And it's like, okay, well, who's supporting that? Canadian Ukrainians, maybe. Is that representative of the rest of the population? Do we want to escalate a war with Russia? Is that actually what we're down for and what we think that our government should be sponsoring? I don't know about you, but I don't agree with it. And so perhaps there's others like me. And so I just, with this stuff, it is clear that never, ever, ever, and we talked about this yesterday when it comes to accounting practice, like these things never get walked back. They just get added to or ported over to different programs. And of course, you're not going to shrink your budget. You're compensated and paid in the government based on the execution of these things. So like, I just find it so sad. And I actually don't know. And the problem with our discussion right now, even, is that I don't know what the solution is. Like, if it's not just getting rid of big government, I don't know what the solution is. And that to me poses a huge problem because it seems very unlikely that we are going to be getting rid of these large governments because they're such massive, massive ships and it's hard to turn them. So,
yeah, there's recently been a handful of different stories. I was just trying to find one on Blacklock's Reporter here, but three stories that immediately come to mind that came out in the last week and a half's news cycle about Canada and government spending is, and I don't have the exact figure, but I believe it was about $16 billion was awarded to different contractors outside the government for all sorts of different things with essentially like no oversight and no consequences in regards to whether they actually delivered upon what they were originally hired for. We also saw recently that new spending of about $329 million, I think it was just awarded to Canadian media agencies and an additional subsidy. Also, there's the story that recently came out about a hackathon that was put on by a couple different Canadian tech companies in regards to rebuilding the ArriveCan app, reminder, the government spent $54 million, primarily used contractors and not all Canadian sourced. And these hackers built the app in 2 days. So they rebuilt
Jesus
the entire
Christ.
ArriveCan app in 2 days. So again, there could be nuances to that story, but when you look at it, even just surface level, it, you know, I could literally spend all day just rhyming off different stories and articles about government inefficiencies. I think that's what it really comes down to, right? Is when we turn to some greater power, some elite to solve our problems, we end up simply getting stuck with a big bill and no solutions. But let's transition to story number 2 because we already went long on the WTF stories. This one's in regards to Alex Jones. So, what hell's like? Jury orders Alex Jones to pay Sandy Hook family's FBI agent $1 billion. So, late this afternoon, the jury in Alex Jones' second defamation trial awarded the families of 8 victims in the Sandy Hook elementary school shooting and one FBI agent $965 million. Today, a jury representing our community rendered a historic verdict, a verdict against Alex Jones' lies and their poisonous spread, and a verdict for truth and our common humanity, Chris Mattel, the family's lead attorney, said outside the courthouse. The plaintiff sought a sum of $550 million to match the total views his claims received per CNN Business. Now, there's a lot to unpack here, and there's a little bit more in the story I want to explore with you guys as well, but a couple quick points here. One, the odds of Alex Jones paying $1 billion is extremely low for a multitude of reasons. We've seen, I think, the parent company of InfoWars filed for bankruptcy for the second time, right? I believe him and his lawyers were kind of prepared for this, so they've presumably positioned some of his assets in such a manner so that he won't be completely destitute from this. But we also heard from the prosecution here, or like the lawyer suing, is that they weren't seeking justice. They were seeking to essentially make sure that Alex Jones could never have a platform again. So this was literally about trying to destroy him, rip him out, root and stem from our media landscape. And they've already done a really good job of that with cancel culture, right? And Alex Jones has had like there's a lot here, right? And then one other point I wanted to make before we continue on in the story is when you compare this essential $1 billion awarded to the families to what like the biggest pharmaceutical settlements have been from mismanagement or misleading the public, when we look at this and $550 million to match the total views in his claims received. So they're saying that 550 million people at some point in time viewed the video clip or clips of him claiming Sandy Hook wasn't real or you couldn't take it at face value. Well, what about the people that got us into the Iraq war, right? What about the people that got us into COVID hysteria and lockdowns and mandate? Like, what about all the different lies that have been told throughout the history of society? Like, why is Alex Jones the only one that needs to be made an example of? And that's something we should really be asking ourselves, regardless of whether you like Alex Jones or not. I think that Alex Jones is a really interesting character. I think he's a fascinating entertainer. And I think he's got, a natural tendency to exaggerate and be verbose when it comes to describing situations. But there's almost always a kernel of truth in the vast majority of stories he covers. Now, he's admitted afterwards that he was wrong about Sandy Hook. And again, there's a lot of nuance there, and we won't be able to explore it in one quick news round update. But a couple other points I want to make. In the first trial earlier this year, Jones was ordered to pay nearly $50 million in punitive and compensatory damages to the families of one victim. This brings the total award of $1 billion as Jones awaits to hear damages in a third defamation trial he lost to the parents of another victim. Jones, primarily through his website and radio show InfoWars, has claimed the shooting was a false flag operation using crisis actors to undermine gun rights. He admitted during the Texas trial in August that he believes it was 100% real. During another sidewalk press conference, Jones denounced the judge and the jury as rigged and mocked the trial as a kangaroo court. And so a big thing here was there was no actual real court case here, right? This was all about deciding the amount of penalties he was going to pay because there's some weird stuff around discovery, right? And like, again, the level of mismanagement here, I've spent a bit of time. If you guys really want to go deep, you're probably going to need to go into the realm of like LawTube, right? So Rekieta Law and Viva Fry are probably the two best LawTube lawyers that are covering everything going on with Sandy Hook and Alex Jones. So I encourage you guys, sink your teeth into that if you're so inclined. But even at surface level, so much of my bullshit detector goes off with it when I think about how other, again, let's be very clear here. Like, Alex Jones didn't kill anyone. He didn't even incite his followers to go and protest or cause harm to the families of Sandy Hook. he said a statement that was factually incorrect. He's admitted he was factually incorrect, but yet we need to make the biggest example of him essentially in the history of American law. Something seems off. Something seems a little bit strange. Any thoughts here, Adam?
Yeah, I mean, I am definitely astonished by the figure that they've decided was to be awarded here. And of course, I agree with you. I highly doubt Alex Jones is going to find $1 billion to pay. But, when I think about this, like, I am about to watch, and we've just watched, like, the Surgeon General of Florida telling us that the COVID vaccine has, an increased risk of heart disease and heart failure and everything of like 80% in
Yeah,
the
84% for males 19 to, or for, yeah, was it 19 to
I think
39
it
or
was
like
18.
21? Yeah,
But
18.
anyways, young healthy males 80% more likely to get heart issues, okay? And they are going to walk away with absolutely zero consequences at all. And then I see Alex Jones, an entertainer, right? I believe he's an entertainer mostly. I don't think anybody should be going to him for just pure facts. I think anytime you see somebody like an Alex Jones, you need to do your homework and do your own research. And to see him getting hit with such a punitive fine for something that, like, I would have thought would honestly be protected by some of the United States free speech laws. It is shocking. I mean, I thought this was going to make our WTF moment, but fair enough to have it put in here. But it's kind of crazy to me.
Well, yeah, I just feel like it's too big of a story to try and simply cover in the WTF section. But yeah, it's a doozy. And I feel like I've got another one here from Matt Teeby. If you guys aren't subbed to his Substack, you need to go and sub to his Substack immediately right before you sub to ours. So make sure you're also subscribed to our Substack. We're putting out articles every single weekday. Really encourage you guys. Again, that's where my show notes from yesterday's deep dive into the fourth turning is available. That's where Adam's notes on the go bag will be available as well. But Anthony Blinken raises the pucker factor on dissent. A brief note about disagreement in the blacklist age. And we really do live in the blacklist age, right? Again, even in today's stories, we've got Alex Jones, who's been blacklisted from all social media. We're talking about Kanye West being blacklisted from banks. There's so many examples, it feels like, at this moment in history. Now, this is in regards to, actually, let's just jump into it. So, a series of ominous statements was buried in Secretary of State Anthony Blinken's recent joint press conference with Canadian Foreign Minister Melanie Joly, trumpeting the tremendous opportunity the Nord Stream blast afforded to remove the dependence on Russian energy. Now, what's interesting here is we have not seen America, Ukraine, Poland, or Britain, or any of what you would kind of expect to be the usual suspects that likely attacked Nord Stream come forward and take responsibility for it. Russia hasn't either. It would be really strange, in my opinion, for Russia to do it, but I'm not going to, put it completely outside the realm of possibility. But could you imagine if an American politician would have said about 9/11 that it represented a tremendous opportunity? Like, it's really interesting, the framing of this terrorist attack essentially versus other terrorist attacks. But going on into Blinken's actual statement, I also made clear that when Russia made this move, the United States and our allies and partners would impose swift and severe costs on individuals and entities inside and outside of Russia that provide political or economic support to illegal attempts to change the status of Ukrainian territory. We will hold to account any individual, entity, or country that provides political or economic support for President Putin's illegal attempts to change the status of Ukrainian territory. In support of this commitment, the Department of the Treasury and Commerce are releasing new guidance on heightened sanctions and export control risks for entities and individuals inside and outside of Russia that support in any way the Kremlin sham referendum, purported annexation and occupation of parts of Ukraine. So, what's really interesting, in my opinion, and Matt explores here, is there's no way to know what a State Department official might believe meets the definition of political support, supports in any way the Kremlin sham referendum, or any of a half dozen phrases in that passage. This is why the negative precedent of government watch lists after the Patriot Act was important. By making lists, officials can seriously impact your life without notice or right of appeal. Even if courts later strike down the activity, it may take nearly 20 years to get there, and that's assuming A, the state discloses enough to make a court challenge possible, and B, they abide by any judicial rulings. So again, there's a lot to unpack there, but in this age of blacklists, like they can essentially like ostracize you from society without any due course, right? Without any like evidence being provided in the public square. You can just become almost a non-entity in our modern day society. And this is before we get into things like ESG scores, social credit scores, and some of the other like draconian measures that we already see playing out to a certain extent in countries like China. So further on, from Google and Twitter to the Department of Justice and State, we've become a blacklisting society, and it's beginning to look like the excesses of the Bush years were just a warm up. Meanwhile, this is from the prepared statement to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee on April 12, 2000, of Stephen Sitanovich, at the time our ambassador at large to the former Soviet Union. Sitanovich told the Senate he had 6 major observations about the election of Vladimir Putin, the second of which was that voters showed even less interest than 4 years ago in returning to the communists to power, his main headline here. So we witnessed a constitutional process with multiple candidates, very high turnout, and according to the many international observers of the scene, few procedural improprieties. I recall the confident forecast of a distinguished Russian analyst after the 1996 election that Russia voters would never again have the chance to pick their president at the polls. In the last decade, elections have become the only legitimate way to select Russia's leaders. So the reason this is important to highlight is, again, 20 years ago, we were showing how Putin was such a great guy, right? It's so bizarre. Pretty much anyone that the American military industrial complex puts on a pedestal, you can fast forward 20, 30 years later, and you can almost guarantee that they're going to be enemies of ours. Whether we're looking at Putin, whether you're looking at Osama bin Laden, right? Whether you're looking at various governments in the Middle East, it literally plays out time and time again. And at this point in time, like it feels like more than a broken record. I don't know how often we're doomed to repeat these patterns, or whether this is literally just like the sun rising in the east, and I just need to grow up and accept that this is the way geopolitics is played. But the last point here, before I want to hear your thoughts, Adam, is the State Department boasted about Putin's election as both legitimate and fruit of a long U.S.-aided effort to build democratic infrastructure in Russia. They described an event heralding a pluralistic future. I leave it to the reader to decide if that constitutes support in any way. And so again, like when we look back to what Blinken's comments were in regards to Russia Monday, is posting about the referendums that Russia claims occurs in these regions that they've annexed, is that support? If you say that, like, hey, it actually looks like probably 90% plus of Crimea residents did want to be part of Russia versus part of Ukraine, is that political support? What are your thoughts, Adam?
Yeah, I think this is very dangerous territory, very deep water to find yourself in. We did see already, small examples of this are like what we saw with the Freedom Convoy here in Canada, where people, if they had made donations to the GoFundMe or through other avenues, that they could have found themselves with bank accounts completely frozen, locked out of their credit cards, inability to essentially just get basic financing that would be required, for, I don't know, things like food, clean water, things like that. And I do believe that the American Patriot Act has actually afforded them a lot more freedom than what CSIS currently has and what we currently have here to fuck with our citizens. And that was already possible. So, and like the Emergencies Act helped out our government, but the Patriot Act covers a lot of nefarious stuff and essentially allows them to spy and conduct these types of covert operations and stuff, or even just blacklist, like what you're saying, American citizens domestically. And I think that this is very scary because, like, I would argue, Matt, that we've supported Putin's message here a couple times. So
well,
does
I
that
don't know
make
about
us,
his message, but at least trying to cover the realities, right? And I think that that's what's really concerning, is that
so
even
that could
just
be in
trying
any
to
way?
have an honest conversation, the way the government could frame it is support. Yeah.
Yeah, well, but the thing is, if you don't know where the line is or where the goalpost is, there's no way to say we haven't, right? It's like, well, in any way. Well, what does that mean? Me just saying that, like, hey, maybe if you are putting nukes on a nation's border that maybe they should react or maybe they will react, regardless to whether or not you think they should. Like, that's support in some way, I'm sure. And it's just, what's most scary about this is none of these things are defined in a way where you could actually change your behavior in order to avoid consequences or penalties and punishment. And in that way, it's very possible for them to just say, well, no, he was supporting that in some way. And it's like, well, God damn. Like, so now you just have the full arsenal of the Patriot Act available to you. You can throw the entire book at me because I said or did something that can be, construed as support in any way. I don't like that. Like, it's kind of disgusting. Again, I find myself in a griping position here where I don't know what the solution is. Like, ask Julian Assange, ask, what's his name from, oh my God, what's his name? Who revealed it? Snowden. Ask Snowden, like, how does this go when you try and reveal some of the issues with these systems, and when you try and bring to light like these whistleblowers who are just being absolutely punished by the state and just shown the full might of the state if you go against them. And it's just like it's really hard to speak out for what's right or what makes sense or what's rational when you don't know even when you're speaking out of turn or when it could cost you literally your life to do that. Like, if these guys didn't escape, what would have happened to them, right? And what is happening to them now? It's like, I don't think this is positive in any way. And again, it's just a reminder to me that, like, your government doesn't actually represent you, right? It's running its own game. And that, to me, I think is the worst part of this article. Is like, if you had asked, 5,000 average Americans, like, what the response would be to this Russia-Ukraine thing, you would get various responses from a lot of them. And so to make a policy like this that just blankets everybody and just uses force against them is so scary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with those sentiments. As far as, what can a person do to be productive? I certainly struggle with that as well. I think trying to create common knowledge the way we do, even on this podcast, I think that that's a net benefit step, but it's certainly a far stretch from fixing and solving the problems we find ourselves in. And again, just the last point I want to make on this before we move on to our final story is understand that, like, you may believe that you exist in a society of laws, but there's literally so many workarounds the governments these days have at their disposal. So, like, we can even just look at like a security alliance like the Five Eyes, right, between the U.S., Canada, UK, Australia, and New Zealand, and we may have individual laws that say that our government can't spy on our citizens. But what you end up finding is, if you look into this whatsoever, is the intelligence agencies will just swap then and be like, hey, we're technically not allowed to spy on Adam because we're Canadian. So America, can you do that? And we'll do you a favor and we'll spy on one of your guys. And like that literally plays out on a daily basis in these security agencies. We've got blacklists and all sorts of things that don't require a trial, that literally just some government bureaucrat has no oversight directly by any sort of elected official whatsoever, can literally destroy your life, destroy your livelihood, simply because they interpret a government memo a certain way, right? Or they interpret a statement like what Blinken shared here that we were just discussing. But let's talk more about government lies, I guess. And specifically, we're going to jump into Joe Biden lies. And I honestly, this one blew my mind. It shouldn't come as a surprise at this point in time, but like, if you think Joe Biden's 100% mentally as fit as he would have been 40 years ago, like, I don't know what to say to you. And if you think that Joe Biden is this symbol of truth and transparency and justice and reconciliation, I literally think that all you've done is swallow Democrat talking points. So New York Times fluffs Biden, says lies are folksy. So when it comes to Biden, a serial liar and plagiarist who for decades lied about a drunk driver killing his first wife and daughter, the New York Times would like you to know it's nothing more than folksy rhetoric and factual edges shaved off. And also, even just that sentence, there's a lot to unpack. And while a lot of people will claim that Tyler Durden from Zero Hedge isn't a real reporter, he comes with receipts, right? So we've got this from courtesy of the Wayback Machine from the Chicago Tribune, September 24th, 1987, right? When Biden admitted errors. So what did he do? Well, he plagiarized speeches. So that was kind of embarrassing. It turns out he's also lied about his credentials. And we just don't have enough time to dive deep into it. But for years and years, he's talked about how his first wife and daughter were killed and his son seriously injured in a vehicle crash because of a drunk driver. But it turns out there's actually zero evidence for that, and he subsequently has kind of walked it back, right? And there's a article here from Washington Times that you can check out as well, courtesy of the Zero Hedge article. But let's just kind of keep rolling, go a little bit further deep in. So, authored by the Times White House correspondent Michael Shear and former political fact checker Linda Q. The report notes that the president has been unable to break himself of the habit of embellishing narratives to weave a political identity, and downplays the constant line as nothing more than stories, which are sometimes only loosely based on facts, to weave together his political identity. Could you imagine them writing that about Donald Trump when he'd be like, it's the best, it's the biggest wall, it's the best wall, it's this, it's that? Like, he had the tendency to aggrandize statements as well. And again, I think it was because he was trying to weave together a political identity. There's no excuse for either politician lying to us. There's never an excuse for a politician lying to us, in my opinion. But Mr. Biden's folksiness can veer into folklore with dates that don't quite add up and details that are exaggerated or wrong. The factual edges shaved off to make them more powerful for audiences. So he's lying for our own good. So, that's okay, according to the New York Times. Again, I thought the New York Times was, and I know better these days, but growing up, I would have thought the New York Times is this bastion of free information, right, and hard-hitting journalism. The article addresses Biden's recent claim that he had a house burned down with his wife in it, which actually turned out to be a small kitchen fire that was extinguished in 20 minutes. The story is not an isolated example of embellishments, the Times admits. The exaggerated biography that Mr. Biden tells includes having been a fierce civil rights activist who was repeatedly arrested. He wasn't. He has claimed he has been an award-winning student who earned 3 degrees. Also not true. And last week, speaking on the hurricane-devastated island of Puerto Rico, he said he has been raised in the Puerto Rican community at home politically. However, if you look into the 2 biographies that are written by him or written about him, there's no mention of the Puerto Rican community whatsoever. Not even one. Kind of strange, don't you think? Author Eric Alderman told The Times, with Biden, people have decided these are not the kind of lies that matter, adding these are the kinds of lies that people's grandfathers tell. So I guess I'm just kind of curious. I didn't know either of my grandpas that well. Maybe I know you know your grandpa a lot closer, Adam, or at least one of them. Does he tell a lot of folksy lies that are for your own benefit?
Never. He literally never does that. And in fact, I think it's so absurd to be able to say oh, okay, the president of the United States, the person who everyone is supposed to be following, who's under that administration and everything, he's just able to tell lies. How do I sort between what's factual and what's not factual if that's just a well-known fact? One of the things that I always think about when we talk about Joe Biden lying is actually a statement from Joe Rogan that they used to do at a comedy club called Stitches in Boston when he was getting his start. They used to do Joe Biden night, where every comedian would switch each other's acts and perform the other person's act. And that was sort of in response and how well known it was that Joe Biden was just he was just plagiarizing other people's speeches. And, if that's the type of background you have, for me, the biggest issue with this is it erodes trust, right? How can I trust you if it's just that well known that, yeah, I mean, he lies, but it's the folksy type of lies or the type of racism your grandfather or grandparents use, right? It's just what the fuck?
But
what
again,
are we talking about?
If it was actually your grandparents, they would get canceled in a second on Twitter
a minute
for these things.
Or look at the other side of the aisle. Okay, if Trump just says these crazy ass things, is he not going to be completely mobilized against? Is that what the New York Times would be writing about him? It's so apparent to me that these institutions are corrupt and clearly motivated to side with certain people and not others. And it makes it really hard to trust these institutions as well. It's hard to trust him if that's well known, but it's also really hard to trust the New York Times if they're accepting that type of behavior. This is the commander in chief, right? Of allegedly the most powerful country on the planet and most powerful empire that has ever existed. I think you want that guy to be honest with you.
Yeah, and at least, like, again, these embellishments, like, they serve no obvious purpose, right? Like, and yet they run ground cover for him every single time he does it. Like, his wife and daughter did die in a tragic car accident. That's enough. It doesn't have to be because of a drunk driver. Like, you don't need to add or build upon that narrative whatsoever. You can just let the truth stand for itself. And it's wild to think that a journalist would run cover for it should be wild to think that. But anyways, we kind of went long here. I'm excited to jump into the second half of the show. So Adam, do you want to kind of line up people what they can expect?
Yeah, sorry guys, we got a little ranty on this show, but the topic we're about to talk about next, it might help you guys if some of this stuff's ringing all too true for you, and you find that it's a little bit more difficult to kind of trust your politicians today, and things like that, distrust, low trust societies, where we're potentially heading with our institutions. Certain things that we're seeing going on in the world, like big climate changes or disasters, like these things are all related to our topic that are coming up next. And we're going to be talking about go bags. Okay. So go bags, preparedness, making yourself be aware of your surroundings and how to best prepare for the things that can come up when you're least expecting it is going to be basically what we're going to be covering in the next subject. And I think a lot of people may have different opinions or different reactions to the concept or idea of preparing or having a go bag. But I want to dispel some of those maybe myths or issues and talk about some of the benefits of being ready when you're least expecting a disaster. So that's what we're going to be talking about in a couple of minutes. And I guess before then, we'll jump into just a couple quick tips tips or suggestions. And for you guys, again, I already brought up Fieldcraft Survival. I'm going to bring up one more person that I think is really brilliant in the space, and his name is Pat McNamara. And Pat McNamara has a ton of exquisite content on YouTube. And we're going to be talking a little bit about some of his content and videos in our presentation today. But I just want to encourage everybody to think about this stuff a little bit more. And if you can't make the show today, make sure you actually, go subscribe to the Substack. It's live there right now where you can see all of my notes. You can see all of the stuff that I'm going to be talking about. And then join our Telegram chat where you can actually actively participate in the conversation and give us some feedback, right? Maybe the things in our presentation don't relate to you or you don't know why they relate to you. Give us some feedback in there. Give us some comments so that we can respond to those things and hopefully bring some more clarity to the subjects we're bringing up. Matt, did you have a tip before we jump off?
Yeah, I won't spend a lot of time on it, but it was going to just be simply get started. Whatever you've been wanting to do, just start somewhere, anywhere, it doesn't matter. Things are always an iterative process and you just need to lean into that. So I know I'm a constant victim of myself where like I want to launch perfectly or I want to execute perfectly. And again, honestly, just get started anywhere, anyhow. It's better than just being stuck in analysis paralysis.
Yeah, I mean, if the president is not needing to be perfect, you definitely don't need to be. The spirit of this show, of course, is to get 1% better. And that's what we're going to be trying to do with all of this content is help you to get 1% better in order to have the best day ever. So we're going to be back here in 2.5 minutes, and we're going to be talking all about the go bag. See you soon.
They say life is what you make it. So what happens if you actually try? What if you actually tried to get your mind right? What if you actually tried to live the high life? What if you happen to die cause life is finite? What if you actually tried to live your best day ever? What if you actually tried to get your mind right? What if you actually tried to live the high life? What if you happen to die cause life is finite? What if you actually tried to live your best day ever? What if you actually grind out when the time's right? What if you actually blinded by your hindsight? What if you actually find out what defines life? What if you actually tried to live your best day ever? I'm getting 1% better every day. I'm getting 1% better every way. I'm waking up every day to a sunny day. No matter what the weather say, life is like a record, so just let it play. Educate, motivate, entertain and demonstrate. Health, wealth, relationships and legacy we elevate. Every day is what you make it, so don't take it and waste it. Never too late to say remember roses grow from pavement. Let me break this down in layman's. Just wanna live outrageous. Build my way to greatness. Gotta speak my truth and face it. Hear the basis lies. Gotta challenge it and break it. Take a shot of truth. Chase it with some motivation. The best day ever. The best day ever. We gon' squad up. Have the best day together. Best day ever. Best day ever. We gon' squad up. Go hard in any weather. What if you actually tried to get your mind right? What if you actually tried to live the high life? What if you happen to die cause life is finite? What if you actually tried to live your best day ever? What if you actually tried to get your mind right? What if you actually tried to live the high life? What if you happen to die cause life is finite? What if you actually tried to live your best day ever? What if you actually grind out when the time's right? What if you actually blinded by your hindsight? What if you actually find out what defines life? What if you actually tried to live your best day ever? I'm getting 1% better every day. I'm getting 1% better every way. I'm waking up every day to a sunny day. No matter what the weather say, life is like a record, so just let it play. Best Day Ever Media. Song by Dan the Lost Boy.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Best Day Ever. Today is going to be our Thursday show where we cover random hobbies and interests that us, the hosts, have. And one of my interests and one of my hobbies is being prepared. I grew up hunting with my grandfather. I've been in the bush. I've been, hunting in sort of the backwoods for about 20 years now with him. And a big part of that culture is being prepared. But I find more and more often, the more I get integrated into a city lifestyle. Okay, I come from a small town. I grew up on a farm, and of course had all of those hunting opportunities. But the more people I meet that are from the city, the less I'm convinced that anybody at all is thinking about preparedness. And growing up hunting, growing up around firearms, growing up around sort of the camping lifestyle, and being able to sustain yourself off of the land. It gives you a different perspective on what's possible, on what sort of natural forces are going to impact you if you're outside of your home. You get a real sense of respect, right? You have to respect nature. It is a mean force. And then recently, I've been thinking about this as we sort of see some more conflicts arise around the world, as we see more of a kind of turn towards lower trust society, and what could be possible as we explore that turning. And if you guys missed our discussion yesterday, we were actually talking about the fourth turning. Okay, so I invite you guys to go back and watch the replay from Matt's talk on the fourth turning, where we discuss, what kind of happens as we go through hard times, and what that means for us societally. And I wanted to have this discussion with you guys about the go bag. Okay. And I'd be interested to hear in the comments what your reaction is, even to just that word. And that's why I put this on the screen here, go bag, right? With like a question mark and a tornado. It's like, what does that really mean to you? When you hear me say go bag, what are you thinking about? Are you thinking about somebody that's like, gone off the deep end on prepping? Are you thinking about a tinfoil hat person? Are you thinking about Jason Bourne, right? Like, what is your first reaction to hearing the word go bag? And what is it you're thinking about? And Matt, I'd actually like to give you that question. When you hear go bag, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I definitely think prepper when I hear go bag. So someone that's trying to be prepared. Prepper can even be it can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. I guess a couple things that like in that vein though that naturally come up to me is like I think it was in the movie The Road, where like I don't even remember what causes society's collapse or what happens in The Road, but I'm pretty sure the main character, like when he first finds out that shit's in the fan, right? And again, SHTF is a regular term you'll hear in regards to go bags, is he fills up his bathtub with water. And that was one of those things where I was just like, oh, like that makes a lot of sense. I grew up on a farm where we had well water and stuff, so that like it didn't like hit as hard as you might like at first think, but like I was like, shit, yeah, if I was living like in a concrete box in the middle of an urban jungle, like filling up your bathtub with water in an emergency sounds really smart, right? And like I can remember that even led me down a stream of like Googling things, and like I think it's called like a water bob, right? You can get for your bathtub that essentially is just like a big plastic bag that you fill instead of filling your tub in a case of emergency. And again, I think a lot of people naturally, when they hear go bag, they think, what's it called? Like iwi talkie or whatever, like end of the world as we know it, when shit hits the fan. And that certainly is, I think, one of the use cases for a go bag, and probably the best use case. But there's a lot of other situations, right? Whether it be a tropical storm like we just saw on the East Coast with Fiona, whether it's short-term civil disobedience like cities like in Minneapolis experience, right, during the BLM riots and things of that nature, or whether it's just like longer term power outages here at the Citadel, right? We had power go out for a period of time. So when I think of go bag, I think of generally like short term prepper. So this isn't about like preparing for the next 10 years. It's not about like having generators or solar panels. It's about like surviving a short period of time, whether that's to allow you to get to a different place, a safer place, or honestly even stay in place, but be able to stay in place. So that's what I naturally think of with the go bag.
Yeah, those are some really great perspectives, and it's obvious when you use the words that you were just using that you've actually looked into this topic before.
Oh yeah,
Like,
I've
I,
done deep rabbit holes.
yeah, I would say you are far more advanced in terms of the language and the intentional sort of thought process that you brought there. And I wanted to bring to light some of the reasons why I actually don't think a lot of people are talking about this right now, or even thinking about it. So I'm just going to share with you, and in fact, I'll share my screen so you guys can read along off of the Substack. But here's some of the reasons why I actually. Don't forget to subscribe, by the way, guys. You guys can subscribe there so that you get notifications as soon as we put these things out. But here are some of the reasons why I actually believe that people aren't really thinking about this every day. Okay. We've enjoyed high trust society for decades, right? In general, I think most people would say they trust their neighborhood or their neighbor, right? Or they trust the government is going to be there. They think that the threat of war is domestically is probably perceived to be very low. Okay, we're generally speaking not waiting here for America to invade or something like that. A lot of us live in what we consider safe neighborhoods or cities. Okay, generally speaking, you go to work every day, you get your groceries, you come home, and you're not expecting to be robbed, right? Or you're not expecting to have a disaster happen to you while you're in and out of the house or doing your daily routine. Perhaps there's no one in our life or no media that we've ever consumed that talks to us about preparedness, right? It's just not on the top of our minds. Perhaps we've never been put in a situation where it mattered. Okay. If you're not like me, growing up hunting or camping or hiking, things like that, maybe you've just never been put in a situation where preparedness truly mattered. Perhaps you believe that somebody else is going to take charge of the situation, right? A lot of people believe wholeheartedly that if there is an emergency, police will always be there. Fire services will always be there. Okay. Ambulatory services, EMS will always be there. And then there's, of course, the idea that, there are sometimes a negative connotation put on the idea of prepping, right? And in fact, we even saw the idea of preparedness getting a lot of flack recently during the COVID pandemic, right? We saw a big run on things like toilet paper, right? We saw a big run.
And that is one of the stupid things to prep for, but yes.
It is, but regardless of whether or not it's stupid, did it cause violence in those stores, right? Did it cause calamity in the parking lots? Did it cause people to act irrationally in in pursuit to get those things that they thought was very important? Okay, toilet paper might seem stupid. Also, something you should have in your go bag, by the way. You're going to regret it if you don't. But so while toilet paper sounds stupid, food, that probably doesn't sound stupid. How fast did we see food get taken off the shelves during COVID, right? Or during the most recent natural disasters? Do you remember, Matt, when the bottled water was all gone in Florida? I can't remember which tropical storm it was, but there was a tropical storm and all the water was gone. All the water, just no bottled water was at the stores. And people were taking cartloads of it out and getting into fistfights during the process. disaster is not likely going to strike you when you're well rested, okay? When you're feeling super sharp, when you're feeling like, all of your muscles are feeling great that day. Disaster is probably going to happen when you're least expecting it. And one of the points about this talk that I wanted to make is that preparing for a disaster, right? Whether that's natural, whether that's infrastructure, whether that's a riot or protest, whether that's domestic terrorism, preparing for this type of stuff is so much more affordable and accessible and easy before the disaster happens. Okay.
Yeah. And one thing just to build on there, Adam, because like as you mentioned, I definitely have read, watched, and just thought extensively on the subject matter. Um, you know, being like mildly prepared allows you to kind of zig when other people are zagging, and that's a big one, right? Like, you know,
Absolutely.
if we're going through a major catastrophe, I don't want to be the dude in line at the grocery store. Like, if I have to go, I want to be the dude at the like hardware store or the pharmacy. Like, again, because there's always going to be levels of preparedness, and that's one of the things that whether it's movies like The Road or TV shows like Jericho, I think did it great. Station 13. There's a handful of other ones about kind of society collapsing and how you'd want to position yourself. The the Mandalays, right? I think that's the name of the book. It's a really popular book amongst like Bitcoiners and preppers. I'll have to double check it, but it goes through a very similar type of collapse. And like, yeah, the first spot that riots are going to break out is over fresh water and food. And so you already want to have yourself insulated to a certain point there so that you can be going after different things, right? Or I guess like The Walking Dead is another classic TV show example. But I've always thought that like, if people are like rioting and robbing grocery stores, I want to be the guy rioting and robbing the pharmacy or the hardware store. Versus like, again, you want to be the idea of a go bag for me in most emergencies is trying to remove yourself from high population densities, right? Because that's where there's just more variables and there's greater risks going to be associated with anything that plays out there.
Yep. And I would completely agree with that. And one of the principles here is you want to be able to control as much of this as you possibly can. And when we're in a situation where there's 20, 30, 50 other people that we're interacting with, it's probably not feasible. So I wanted to bring up just before we even get into what goes in a go bag, what have we been talking about when it comes to the tools and resources necessary to keep you, your family, and your network safe? I want to talk about some of the things that are most likely going to happen to you. Okay. So, Matt, can you think of a few of the things that are going to happen when a disaster happens right beside you? Like, how about this? You're driving right now to Winnipeg, and you're on the highway, and all of a sudden, the cars in front of you have a massive crash. You end up participating in this crash. Your vehicle's disabled, right? There are people around you that are now bleeding. Okay. Maybe you've witnessed the death of somebody. Okay. It's a violent situation. There's blood involved. Certainly there's a lot of chaos. People are screaming. What are some of the things you believe are going to happen to you and your state of mind?
Oh, like certainly like everyone goes into a certain degree of shock or like they're on tilt, right? In regards to it. So oftentimes you won't be necessarily capable of making the best decisions as you could if you were cool, calm, and collected. So I think that's a big aspect. And again, any level of preparedness you can have will like it's almost kind of like a cheat, right? Like it'll help you kind of like if you've already got the first aid kit in your vehicle, you're going to be like, well, I know I've got that, so I guess I'll get that out, even if I don't know how to use it or anything like that. But it's all about just like having those kind of like shortcuts, or it's going to reduce the friction to you hopefully making the right decision.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with all of those things. And you brought up something really important there, which is even if you don't know how to use it. And that's one of the things I do want to discuss today is like, hey, your tools and resources that you're going to decide to put in your go bag or carry with you in your vehicle are only as good as your ability to actually use them effectively. And then I think that that's one of the really important things to cover here.
It definitely like it's better to know how to use them to not, but it's still much better to have them and not know how to use them versus to not have them whatsoever, right? Like whether you're thinking of like a barter situation or again, it could be your contribution where it could be like, I'm a doctor, like someone's a doctor there in that car crash, but they don't have a first aid kit. And you're like, well,
Yep.
at least I got this, right? Like I'm contributing. I can at least be a net positive here to this situation.
Absolutely. So I think a few of the first things that are going to happen to you is, first of all, your sympathetic nervous system is going to take over, and that's going to cause that fight or flight response that Matt's referencing. And that, of course, is going to do a few things, right? Essentially, what your body's going to do for you and take over for you is flooding your muscles with blood. When your muscles get flooded with blood, your brain starts working a little bit funny. You start losing tactile ability. Okay, so your hands and response times are going to be different. It's not going to be how you feel normally. Your heart rate's likely to increase. Cortisol, adrenaline, these types of things that make our responses change under pressure are going to absolutely be affecting your ability to make decisions, as well as, those tactile things like using your hands to unzip things, unbuckle yourself, escape the vehicle. Maybe there's a fire that you need to get out of, or maybe you need to help somebody else out of the vehicle. Your decision-making ability is going to be affected. And the thing is that a lot of the time when these things are happening, a lot of the people around you are going to be in the same situation. And what that causes is a general calamity. Okay. If everybody is panicking and everybody's under duress and all of their decision making has been affected, it's very, very important that somebody takes charge. And so I think in all of these situations, what you immediately want to do is take charge of the situation, whether that's for your own personal help or for somebody else. And one of the first things that we want to do, if it's available to us, right, is try and get additional help. So whether that's an emergency service or getting the help of other people around you, you want to try and get help, and you want to assign help if you can. So if everybody thinks, there's this weird bias in emergency situations where everybody thinks that somebody else is taking control and somebody else is actually going to do something about it, and it's immediate.
And that's a huge one, honestly. Like, it doesn't even have to be a giant emergency, right? Like, we've even shared in some of our news stories, like people acting out on the subway, and you can see there's this giant deference to authority. If there's no one clearly in authority there, we often end up, there's probably a specific term for it, but essentially it's a tragedy of the commons, right? Or there's that like classic story, I think, of in the 70s or 80s in New York, where like, was it like dozens of people listened to this woman be raped on the street, and everyone else assumed someone else would call the police. Yeah. And like, it literally just happened and played out in real time there. And again, it's because everyone else is just kind of looking around, shocked and completely disoriented by this unusual stimulus, right? Whether it be like that emergency, physical violence, whatever.
Yep. And it happens quick. The thing is that these things happen very quick as well. And so I guess my initial point is, first of all, have the tools and equipment you're going to need if something like this happens. Second of all, know how to use it. And then third, take charge immediately. And you have to just appreciate the fact that action is faster than reaction. Okay. So when an emergency situation presents itself, it is going to happen much faster than you can decide to act on. And when that happens, it's going to come down to your familiarity with what you have on your person, whether that's like in your actual go bag or in your vehicle. We're going to discuss those two different categories, or in your home. And you need to be able to quickly make these decisions. And I wanted to cover just a few of the things that might happen, because I know some people, if they're listening to this, they're going to instantly go Jason Bourne here and think like, okay, we're escaping and evading spy agencies or something like that, or evading the government. And more than likely, you're going to lose that battle. But there's a lot of other things that happen and could happen to you that would make you want to be prepared. So I'm going to list off a few different things and kind of take you guys through a few events that I'm aware of that have happened in my lifetime. So, Matt, do you recall the Boston Marathon bombing?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, 9/11, 2001, right? School shootings. We've just actually finished talking about Sandy Hook, and there are many other examples of that in the United States. Mass shootings in public spaces. I'm thinking about Las Vegas, okay? Over 50 people were shot in Las Vegas, and many, many, many more injured, okay? Riots and protests. So I'm thinking January 6th. I'm thinking BLM. I'm thinking Portland. Okay. Matt already brought up Minneapolis. I'm thinking natural disasters. Okay. Natural disasters. Matt just brought up Hurricane Fiona, was it?
Yeah, that we experienced on the East Coast, right? And I
Yep.
was going through your list here, Adam, and one that you didn't put on that is probably a very realistic situation, because we've experienced it recently. It's just like the Interact system going down or a
Yep.
telecommunication system going down as well, right? And again, that doesn't necessarily mean that immediately people are killing each other on the streets, but the person that had a little bit of cash in their pocket was at a much greater advantage than the individual that wasn't.
Absolutely. And just to give you some context of basically things that have happened in my lifetime. Now, of course, I'm fortunate that we live in, southwestern Ontario. Not a lot of this specifically happens in southwestern Ontario, but if you're consuming this anywhere else, this could be very relevant to you. So, just in the last couple of years, we've had wildfires, tornadoes, hurricanes, winter storms. I don't even, what is it? Derecho, a straight line of windstorm,
Hmm.
whatever. It's basically a goddamn thunderstorm and tornado, hurricane, tropical storm, earthquake, wildfire. Okay. These things are everywhere. And if you look at some of the death tolls, I mean, 2, 90, 115, 237, 47, 31, 211 killed, 120 missing in this hurricane in 2020. That's Hurricane Eta. And so these things are real, they're present. They can absolutely happen to you. And one of the reasons why I think it's important for us to talk about this is because, again, I don't know that everybody fully groks the importance of being prepared for these things, because I think there's a bias or a pitfall to feeling safe in your home, right? So when you're home, like, this is where your family sleeps. This is where you come back from work every night, you lock your doors, you feel good, right? And being at home, I think it's one of those false senses of security of something like what we've just discussed goes on. Like these natural disasters, we've heard countless stories of people that are in wildfire areas and they just decide, no, I don't believe that the fire is going to come this way. I was watching the news last night. It's 200 kilometers over the other way, and that's the way the winds are going. And then all of a sudden, the winds change, and you hear people trying to panic and get the hell out of the house. Right? They're trying to get out of Dodge before the fire reaches them in their house. The same can be said about flash flooding, tornadoes, hurricanes. We're seeing this right now in Florida. It's very real for people. We're seeing it here on the East Coast in Canada. So the wildfire's been burning up the West Coast for the last couple of years. We saw real severe damage there and loss of life. And so I really believe that these things are real and exist outside of that kind of Jason Bourne, oh, you've got to go bag because you think you're some cool military guy or you think you're evading spies. It's like, no, I need to be able to prioritize and execute the materials and goods and tools that I need when I need to get out of my house fast. And if you're in Southwestern Ontario, maybe this isn't as applicable to you, but I still have it because I don't know that there's an excuse not to. And in my article here, I've written that I believe that ignorance is a very poor excuse to not have these things. And the nice thing about what I'm about to talk about in terms of, what goes in it, why are we thinking about these types of things? What are some of the considerations I want to make? The nice thing is a lot of this stuff is probably in your house. Okay. If you've ever gone camping, okay, if you've ever taken a hiking trip, if you've lived in an environment that has various seasons, right, you probably have a lot of the clothing and equipment already in your house that would contribute to something like a go bag. Okay, but there's a few things I want to cover really quick before we even list everything that goes into it. When we're talking about the go bag, and Matt's already kind of brought this up, but what we want is a bag that's prepared with materials, resources, tools that we have decided that fits our lifestyle, but not just us, not just the individual. If you have a family, I've seen this before and I've heard it actually talked about on a lot of these videos that, like, alpha male has his go bag. He's got it all set up. It's absolutely perfect. And then he realizes that he's packed it just for himself, right? He realizes that he doesn't have the medication or whatever that his kids need, and it's not in his go bag. And I think it's important to just realize that, like, when shit hits the fan, you might be alone, but you might also have to care for your family and you might be separate from them. Okay. I think that's a very common theme is like, the kids are at school, right? You're at work. Your wife's at work. your kids are at home with the wife, or you're at home with the kids, and wife's out of the house, or whatever your sexual orientations are. I don't care, but be prepared, right? So what we're trying to do with this bag is it needs to be fast. Okay. It needs to be accessible. Okay. The things that are in it, we need to be considerate of how much they weigh, right? What's our mobility like when we take this bag? When we take this bag, where are we going? How fast do we need to get there? How long are we going to be doing this for? And generally speaking, Matt brought up something really interesting. And the bag that I'm going to talk about today is actually more of a 72-hour bag, but there's different bags for your different applications. Okay. So I've got an at-home bag, and I've got a in transit or a vehicle go bag. Okay. And the vehicle go bag, the purpose of that is to think not in days, but rather think about hours. Okay. Because we're going to be somewhere else outside of our home operation base, and we're going to need to get there, right? More than likely, or we're going to need to get somewhere safe that has a lot of resources for us. So the first bag I want to talk about is kind of your home bag. And what we're going to try and cover with our home go bag is shelter, food, water, security, hygiene, medical supplies, and then recovery and rescue supplies. And that sounds like a lot. But again, I need to remind everybody that you probably have most of this stuff in your house right now. And what it comes down to is, finding a bag. You probably even have a bag. Okay. I'm talking about a bag in a closet right now, a backpack, right? Doesn't need to be a fancy hiking bag. Doesn't need to be a several $100 purchase or a multiple $1,000 outlay at some outdoor store. And I think that's worth talking about, because I think a lot of people may be thinking to themselves, like, well, what's the likelihood I'm going to use this thing, first of all? And then second of all, if I'm not going to use it, or if I don't think I'll ever use these things, then what priority do I need to give this? And it's like, well, if you need it, you're going to need it bad. And if you don't have it, it's really going to suck and be expensive. Like we already talked about, like if you're trying to find food in the middle of a disaster, well, so is everybody else. So here are some of the things that I want to talk about with the go bag at your house. And of course, this is separate from what I think you should have at your house as redundancies so that you can shelter in place. This is more of a legit, like, we need to get out of the house, or we need to, leave our home for some short amount of time. Usually I'm thinking about, a minimum 72-hour kind of period, which is 3 days, by the way. And I'm thinking about, how do I get out of the house? And this is separate from the conversation of, how you should secure your home, what sort of supplies you should have there in case of emergencies and sheltering in place. First of all, I think it's important to keep this bag accessible. It's important that your family and anybody else that is going to be using your go bag or bags needs to be aware of where it is. Okay. So it not only is it accessible, but they know where it is. And then third, we've actually trained up everybody in the house or in the family unit or whatever that looks like to use the equipment inside of it. And we've packed the required goods. So first thing going in the go bag, and just like basic best practice here, is anything that's essential for an emergency should be on the outside of the bag. Okay. It should be very accessible in a dedicated pocket. So I'm thinking things like medical and things like that. And then some best practices for mobility. There's a common saying here that mobility equals survivability. This is very important, right? If you're in a mass shooting or something, you want to get the hell out of there as fast as you can. If you're in a flood or a fire or something like that, of course, mobility is going to equal survivability in that example. And so we want to pack our heavy shit at the top. You want your weight on your back, on your shoulders, not on your lower back, pony back. So that's just a best practice. But in general, we want to prioritize things that are going to be for emergency use, like your medical kit needs to be super accessible. But first thing I want to talk about, shelter. Okay. I always have shelter in my go bag. So shelter could look like a bunch of different things depending on the size of the bag you have, your physical ability, and your climate, right? Like what your actual needs are going to be. So I always have a small tent. I have a 2-person, very small, very light, very compact tent that I keep in my bag. I have a tarp, okay, as an alternative to a tent, or you could use a hammock, or you could use a poncho. You basically are looking for anything that you can sleep on, sleep in, and sleep under. Okay, because the ground is actually kind of your enemy. It's a really good conductor of heat. So it's going to take your heat and make you very cold. And that is dangerous, even in warm climates. Okay. Don't fool yourself. You don't want to fight the weather and fight the earth. So I think that's really important to have shelter. I also have a sleeping bag in mind. We live in Canada. It gets cold at night here, regardless if you're in the summer or winter. It's just cold in general. And a light sleeping bag in a compression bag to save a lot of space. That's important to me. I've also got an inflatable pillow, not required, but nice luxury and very compact. It's a very small item. I've got a medical kit. And the medical kit, again, you want this to be super accessible. I've got a kit there to essentially stop the bleed. Okay, so things like gauze. I've got a ton of gauze and compression stuff. I've got a tourniquet. Okay, that is always accessible, and you want that on the outside of your bag, on your belt if you can. But a tourniquet's good if you get puncture wound from anything. You're trying to escape, cut yourself on something, hit an artery, and it starts bleeding. This will save your life. You can also improvise one if you have, a shirt and a stick or anything like that. If I had any prescriptions, I would keep prescriptions in my go bag. Okay. So if your kid has, diabetes, some sort of medication that they take regularly, make sure you have the goddamn prescription in your bag and make sure it's not super expired. So it will actually be effective.
Yeah.
EpiPen.
And that's a big one, is like cycling through it, right? If you're going to have medication in your bag. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's important. EpiPen, great for all sorts of uses. You can buy them, you can steal them from your buddies that have allergies. I keep one all the time. It's a great thing to have if you need it in an emergency. Antibiotics. A lot of people don't think about this, but this is honestly one of the most important things that you could have stored around your house and in your go bag. Make sure you have that because, like Matt said, there's going to be people. If this is a true emergency, people are going to be freaking the hell out, and they guaranteed don't have antibiotics. And if they need them, you should have them. Scissors, great for cutting off clothing if there's any injuries. Multiple uses there as well. I keep glue. Okay, if you're bleeding a lot, but it's not serious enough to warrant a tourniquet, glue you can usually use to stop the bleed and seal wounds and stuff like that. A small sewing kit would be ideal in here as well. I don't have that in mind, but that would help. I keep a boo-boo kit. Okay. So Band-Aids, stuff like that. It's actually really dangerous to get infections if you're trying to survive.
Honestly, I think that's one of the things that a lot of people don't understand, that like in a real collapse, that like infection's going to kill you. It's going to be like, you climbing a rusty fence and like getting a little scrape and not cleaning that out. Yeah.
Instantly blood poisoning, any type of infection that goes to your bone. Like, dude, it's really scary. So, amoxicillin, great for that type of thing, but just as well as covering it up and keeping it clean. Right. And I also keep painkillers because if you actually need to go and you're very sore and that's preventing you from having your required mobility, you should just have it. It's cheap, it's simple, very easy to stock, and they don't go bad that often. So I keep painkillers in there. I also keep 550 paracord. And if you guys don't know what 550 paracord is, I should have included an image there. So I'm just going to pull one up right now on our screen share. But I'm telling you, this stuff is so.
Oh, you're muted, Adam.
Oh, sorry. This stuff is so cheap and it's available on Amazon. Like, I'm just going to pull this up because I forgot to include an image, but like, this is what 550 paracord is. And it's just like a very thin kind of, it's probably nylon or something. But this stuff, the reason why it's called 550 is it's got a 550 pound tensile strength. Okay. And yeah, nylon inner core. It's wear resistant. It doesn't create lint. Its low capacity is absolutely unbelievable. And it's so cheap. This is 100 meters of it available, prime shipping, 1-day shipping for $28. This stuff has unlimited uses. If you need to tie up your shelter, if you need to replace a shoelace on your boots or your shoes, if you need to tie anything up, like, Matt's got bears with him. So if you need to tie up your food, right? You can hook a carabiner up on one end, throw it up across a tall branch, hoist up your food. There is unlimited use cases for paracord. You can also make a nice sling. Some of my guns just have 550 paracord as the sling because it's replaceable, it's simple to remove, and it's very easy to tie. Make sure you know some knots too, by the way, if you're actually going to be prepared for this type of thing. And so I think that having the 550 paracord is important. Now, Matt, have you ever thought about like the color of the things that you're using in your go bag?
Yeah, like I definitely think it's valuable, right? That's why you often find those like paracords and the greens and browns and sort of gray colors. And one thing, this was kind of tangential, and I ended up having to Google it because I was having a brain fart here. But is even like when thinking about like your clothing and stuff, right? I'm a huge believer in like gray man. The
Yep.
idea of like in an emergency, you just want to blend into the background, and again, like literally things like kind of a gray and black hoodie, right? Like your shirt wouldn't be so good, in my opinion, for a gray man approach.
Well, it would in Canada. Come on. You're wearing plaid. Okay,
Gray and
so
black.
the thing with the gray man thing, I want to talk about this really briefly because we could certainly get off on a tangent here. But the gray man theory is that essentially, yeah, if there's an emergency or if you're trying to hide, one of the best ways to do it is to just avoid attention. Okay. Now, I think there are some cases where you may want to consider your visibility. And if you're hiding, if you think that this is like all out meltdown, we're super low trust right now. Like we're not sure about the intentions of the people around us. And so we want to just escape and evade attention. I think you should stick with very low key colors. This also applies to your choice of backpack. So actually I have it right here. I'm just going to grab it.
Yeah, and while Adam's doing that again, like I think gray man theory is often something that like gets overlooked in a lot of like, you know, high production video and TV shows in regards to like end of the world scenarios. It's like, man, you just want to blend in. Even think of like for people that are fans of The Walking Dead, right? I think like at one point in time they discovered like, oh, if we rub ourselves with like dead people, like they don't pick up on us. And like think of that as a similar principle, right? It's just like the dude that's in a Hawaiian t-shirt with a Rolex is much more likely going to get approached on the street than the dude in the gray hoodie with the hoodie pulled up, sunglasses on. And again, you don't want to look too inconspicuous. Like you don't want to literally look like you're a secret agent or anything. And like even small things like your physical movements, right? Like you don't want to like naturally scope out a place and look like you're scoping out a place. You want it just to seem like, you know, you're just part of the background. You're an NPC. This is the one time being an NPC is a really good thing.
Yeah, literally. And I firmly actually believe in this, right? If you stand out, you become a target. You do not want to be a target.
And like honestly, even just like to take this on a little tangent here, Adam, but like I've owned real estate in like harder neighborhoods, right? Like and some pretty rough stuff. And like at one point in time, my sister was managing one of the rougher buildings. And like one of my pieces of advice to her was like predators can see a victim. Like they can literally tell based upon your body movements, your body language, the way you hold yourself, whether you make too much eye contact or too little eye contact. And you just need to like know that you're not the victim, right? Like, and honestly, it sounds stupid, but I think people that have looked into this stuff, like that can have a massive impact on how others interact with you, even in just like normal day society, let alone a conflict oriented or a high stress situation.
Well, this is literally hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, right? We are technically prey. And I think that it's baked into our genetics to understand when somebody looks fearful, and when we shift into if somebody's shifted into a predator mode, I mean they're going to notice these things. It's very visible. So I want to show you my bag. My bag right now is being repurposed because I'm about to go moose hunting for the week. So it's not fully loaded. So I'm not going to unpack the whole thing for you because it's prepped now for hunting. But this is the bag that I use for my go bag. It's a 30-liter bag, so it's relatively large. But I'm also a 200-pound, 5'10" powerhouse, right? I can carry this bag literally, and I have on 100-kilometer excursions before with no issue, fully loaded to the brim. So I want to take into consideration the weight and how much storage this thing has, and then of course get my supplies around it. But one thing you will notice is it's a hiking bag, right? This is actually a bag made by Black Diamond, which is just a hiking brand. So it's available at like, Mountain Equipment Co-op or whatever. But one thing that is a consideration as well is if you are packing your go bag in a very overt kind of like tactical bag is what they're calling them now, like by brands like 511 and stuff like that, it's actually another way to stand out. So a common bag that's not very bright will allow you to cover and conceal yourself as you're actually engaging in this activity of getting out of Dodge. You'll see here, I never finish my prescriptions because I'm bad at doing that, but this is amoxicillin. I've got a shitload of it. So if there was ever to be a real emergency requiring antibiotics, I've got antibiotics for me and anybody that would be around me, and enough to last, honestly, almost any infection. I also have indomethacin here, which is going to be another type of antibiotic. Right in the top of my bag, I can access my flashlight, anything like that. And so anything that's going to want to be very accessible, you're going to want to have in the top of your bag or on the exterior of your bag. There's also these kidney pouches when we get hiking bags. Kidney pouch is great because you can put anything else that needs to be readily accessible in there. You could think something like a knife, a compass, multi-tool, anything that's going to be used where you might want to have great access to it. The other thing that I keep in my go bag is actually a hatchet. Hatchets are great multi-use tools. And when we're thinking about a go bag, you want almost everything to have a multi-use purpose. Hatchet, excellent for breaking windows if you need to, excellent for getting trees. If you need to build a shelter, if you need to build a fire, you're going to want a hatchet. You can also use hatchets to break locks. And so again, if we're in a truly get the hell out of Dodge situation, you may need to gain access to resources that you don't have. Okay. And that's part of improving your position and improving your security. And so hatchet's a great tool. Also, we're going to get banned from YouTube, but great personal defense if you really, really, really needed it for that purpose. I will also have dehydrated food provisions. And some people will claim that this is not as necessary because the idea of the go bag is to get to places that have more resources. But one of the arguments for this type of thing that I see is that you're going to need a lot of calories. Okay. It is extremely expensive to your body to be in high stress situations. You're burning through calories. The way your parasympathetic nervous system works, if you start eating, if you consume snacks, your body kind of calms down and it understands that it's back into thinking mode and not survival mode. So eating is actually a really important part of surviving, and morale as well. And morale is great. I mean, morale is one of the hidden secrets to surviving any situation. So for that, I use dehydrated food. I actually use MREs, like a meal ready to eat, which is something that you will need to boil water for, which is in some cases argued against because if we're thinking about like real scary stuff, if we're escaping from it, you probably don't want a lot of heat signature and you probably don't want a lot of visibility. But for my purposes, I don't think I'm really trying to hide that bad. And what I actually use for this is called a jet boil. And a jet boil, if you guys look it up, it's a really effective little camping stove, I guess is how you would say it. And I'll show it here on the screen if you're watching this through video. But these things are absolutely insane. The visibility of these things is very, 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 very low profile because it fits. The flame essentially gets dispersed through all these little fins here. And I've actually got this one here, the Jetboil Minimo. But this thing will light and ignite and boil your water in like seriously probably 30 seconds or less for the full cup, and you cannot extinguish them. I don't care if there's 100-kilometer winds, you can light this thing and it will absolutely work for you. And I think that's a huge advantage when it comes to being able to eat. And eating a real meal is so much more rewarding than some of these like really super dehydrated blocks of just like strict calories that you see some people using. I also keep chocolate bars and trail mix. Okay. Trail mix, chocolate bars, these types of things last forever in their packaging as long as they're not open. and they can offer you a lot of really cheap and light calories, and they're super dense, right? Super dense in calories and fat and all the things that are going to make your brain start functioning better. I always keep a multi-tool and knife in my bag. So I keep a couple different knives. One of them is going to be more for like handling and dealing with food or animals. And then the multi-tool is going to be for dealing with any random situations that come up. In terms of the multi-tool, I would generally speaking recommend a Leatherman. And I think that one of the best Leatherman knives that are out there is called the Leatherman Wave. And the Leatherman Wave has all sorts of tools on it. I mean, if you look at it, it's $150. And so you know, I respect that if this is too much for something you don't think you're going to use all the time, that might be a lot of money. And so, of course, this is perhaps something you need to take into consideration. But there are many other brands at many different price points, and I think this is something you can use a lot if you made it a part of your regular day.
And like, I guess one thing I would just say in general on this subject matter is like, it's always going to be a scale. So like, no matter what, some preparation is far better than no preparation.
Yes.
So again, like if your options are like, well, I can't afford that, so I'm not going to even bother trying to get a go bag ready, you would still be a lot better with literally just like a box cutter or a utility knife than like no knife whatsoever, or like a pair of pliers plus a box cutter. Like it's still going to be a huge net benefit to you versus literally just ignoring it because you're like, oh, I'm tuned out because this price point's above where I'm at.
Yeah, absolutely. Carrying on down the list here. So I've got my knives and multi-tool. I always recommend having a compass. Now, the thing about having a compass is you would have to know how to use the damn thing. So, again, I think a lot of the tools that I pack, you want to have some experience in handling these things and actually using them. To go along with your compass, you're going to want a map of the city. And in addition to your map of your city, you'll want a map of the province or state that you live in. And I think this is important because if we think about some of the disasters I described, perhaps it's a domestic terrorism, perhaps it's a natural disaster like a fire, flood, tornado, earthquake, things like that. It's possible that your cell phone service isn't going to work, right? And I know we rely heavily on this stuff, but we've actually covered an article in the last 24 that describes 30 minutes of power backup for your cell phone towers. Okay, so if all the power's out everywhere, you may have only 30 minutes of GPS capability through your cell phone. Okay, if you don't have the map downloaded on your phone, or if your phone runs out of power, or if you don't have a map, where are you going when you run into that area of the fire, right? Or the flood that has interrupted your road? Like if you're Matt only has like basically one road out of his place. And if he goes down the one way and he can't figure out how to get where he needs to go, does he just suffer from a fire or flood? It's like, well, if you had a map, you might be able to find an alternative route. And if you had a compass, yes.
Or if you have a boat.
Or have an
alternative route.
Matt's go bag includes a boat. Matt's going to pull out his pocket boat and zoom across. GPS, guys.
Honestly, like I think a lot of people underestimate the value of a map, right? Like if you only grew up in a cell phone society, and particularly a smartphone society, it's really easy to just think that like you don't need a map whatsoever. I remember like in my third year of university, I had a sales job. And it was before smartphones, but like I had a cell phone, and like I had to actually learn really how to read maps and understand them and be able to like find in different neighborhoods and stuff like that. And I thought I knew the city pretty well, and I knew the main arteries, but I had no idea about just the sprawl of subdivision after subdivision. And understand that a lot of neighborhoods these days are literally designed to make it difficult to navigate in the hopes that it essentially de-incentivizes people that are strangers from coming into your neighborhood. So that's why like subdivisions are no longer like boxes, right? They literally used to just be like, straight lines and squares. And now you've got all these winding, curving roads, regardless of it actually being necessary.
Yeah. And I literally can't stress how important this is. Like especially when you're in a disaster and you don't know where the hell to go, it's really important to have the map. Another tip or trick that I have, and Matt, I hope you're okay with this, but I think we're going to go a little bit over time today, but I do think it's important to know this stuff. This is my everyday bag. Okay. This is just a backpack, nothing special. This isn't crazy. This is the bag that's going with me everywhere. And I didn't even prepare. I didn't even realize I was going to show these on the camera. So this is literally just what's in my bag. Power bank. Okay. This is coming up on the list, but I just have a power bank here. This thing can charge my iPhone, like I think 10 full charges, as well as it acts as a flashlight. And yeah, I mean, this thing's just genius. But here's my map. You guys are thinking I'm kidding. This is a large Ontario map actually provided to me by Matt. And inside this map, if I open it up, no, I'm not going to be able to fold this thing back. That's another lesson. But if I open it up, there's also a highlighted route, okay, to Matt's place, which is interesting, right? Like if I needed to go to Matt's place and my cell phone's not working, do I actually know the route? Or if the one route that crosses from here to there is broken, how do I get around that? Right?
And another little best practice is honestly like writing down important phone numbers on that map and other things in that regards, because again, like the vast majority of us no longer remember other people's phone numbers because of convenience.
Or their address, right? It's just saved in your phone.
100%. And so again, like these are very, like everyone can afford a $10 map of their city or region and afford a pen to write down a few key numbers or highlight a few key locations.
Yep. And key locations is another thing, right? What are points of interest for you? Where is the pharmacy? Do you even know? Like, do you actually know where the closest pharmacy is and how to get there? And what if that one road that you always take is not available to you at this point? Interesting kind of thought. So we've got maps, GPS. A little Garmin GPS these days is like $150. They're waterproof, they're weatherproof, they connect to satellites. They're going to be available when cellular is not. Very great tool, but I will tell you this. Most of these GPSs don't have roads on them. Okay. They have your specific location, your long and lat, or if you're using the MGRS system, they've got that grid system for you, but it's not really going to tell you where you are. So best practice with your GPS, hook it up to your computer. They all do this these days, and plug in the points of interest. Okay. Plug in the important places to you that you want to get to using your GPS. This is another important step people just don't talk about. And, to me, that stuff's important. Flashlight. I always keep a very bright flashlight, 1,000 lumen flashlight. It's an extremely great deterrent for crime and violence. When people are blinded, we have this natural reaction to back up and back off. And that's a really great tool if you want a non-violent threat deterrence, and also obviously can just act as a flashlight for you. You can also I can break windows with mine very easily as well. Headlight, you saw my headlight. It's right there, accessible in the top of my bag. Very important. I always look for lights as well that have a white light and a red light. The red light is going to give you the ability to, with low visibility to others, to be able to see your surroundings, and it won't pick up as much on anybody else's eyes far away from you. Clothing, people are going to go crazy here with this stuff. And I seriously need to advise you against packing really like a lot of clothes. You actually don't need a lot of clothes. Okay. And I know this from my hunting days, but when I go hunting, and this is going to freak some people out. If you're in the city and you're used to like you change every single day, new shirt, new pants, new socks, new everything. I'm telling you right now, you don't need to do that. Okay. If you're in a survival situation, you're not hauling around your dresser. Okay. And I kind of make a tongue-in-cheek joke here in my actual write-up where I'm like, no, honey, the hair straightener is not that important right now. Or, no, dear, the 20-year-old bottle of scotch and all your watches and all this stuff's not that important right now. Watches, maybe if they're valuable because they could be used for bartering. But you know what I mean? Like, you don't need to bring the whole dresser. And so I would really focus on the minimum viable gear for the weather. Okay. What kind of weather are you likely to experience? And this is where the go bag needs to be seen as a dynamic tool. Okay. It's changing every season. In the winter, it doesn't make sense to have all your summer gear. And in the summer, it doesn't make sense to pack a toque. Okay. It just doesn't make any sense. So pack this thing according to the seasons. Socks, underwear. Those things are extremely important. If you get freaking crotch rot and you're out trying to survive, it's fucking deadly. And so is your feet. You don't want your feet getting damaged. And when your feet get really damaged, it makes it hard to survive. I've done 100 kilometer hike in one night before. So like we start one day, hike for like 10 hours, then you kind of sleep an hour or two if you can, and then do another 10 hours, and that's your 100K. If your feet get fucked up, you are in bad trouble. And of course, mine did in the first 8 hours, which sucked. But seriously, having clean socks is going to help you with that. Rain and cold weather gear. We live in Canada, so this is super applicable to us. But if your go bag doesn't have the means to help you survive in the winter at night outside, you're in trouble. Okay. And again, we've already mentioned the idea of visibility. It's not ideal to be seen if you're trying to not be seen. So a big fire is probably not going to be ideal for you. What you want to do is get off the ground, have great cold weather gear. I always recommend a puffy. Okay. This is something that not a lot of people have, but if you are going to talk to any military special forces guys, they all pack a puffy. Puffies can be shrunk down into really small sizes. Mine happens to be from Arc'teryx, which is, albeit extremely expensive. It's probably $350, but it can be packed down into basically a ball that'll fit in your hand, and it will give you warmth way, 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 way further than a big, heavy cotton sweater. There's a common saying in survival that cotton kills. Okay, you want to avoid cotton. Cotton's a real bitch because when it gets wet, it takes your heat. Okay, and it becomes very heavy and it's very slow to dry. So cotton kills. Okay, so I actually forgot to write that in my write-up, which is unfortunate, but cotton kills. And so what's the better alternative? Wool, smart wool, merino wool. Okay, this shit's expensive, but you can often find it heavily discounted at stores like Mountain Equipment Co-op. You just might be getting a color or pattern that people don't like, which is fine. We're surviving. We don't need to look that cool. Hat for the sun. A lot of people don't think about that. The sun will also kill you. Okay. If you get seriously sunburned or sunstroke, you're not going to be surviving that long. Water purification chemicals. Iodine's great. There are multiple AB solutions that just come in packs. All your outdoor stores, all your camping supply places will have this type of thing. But what it allows you to do when accompanied with a water vessel is that you can collect water. And remember, guys, if you're in a survival situation, people are looking for water and food, like we've already talked about. Okay, so when you're at a place that is plentiful in water, what you want to have is a vessel that can carry the water and then get the fuck out of there. Okay, get your water, go somewhere else to purify it. You don't want to be hanging out where the water and the food is. That's what's going to draw in other people. So a nice vessel. I prefer a Camelback bladder. That's what I use. And then you put your water chemicals right into it. It'll purify it all. Then you've got 3 liters of water that you can carry away with you. And it'll fit perfectly, should fit perfectly in your bag. Hygiene kit, dental health, right? So toothpaste, travel toothbrush, or a cutoff toothbrush, tampons, okay, for my ladies out there, and baby wipes. Baby wipes are the secret weapon on this list that you might not see on anybody else's list that you absolutely need. It's required. No explanation needed. Trust me, baby wipes are the play. Toilet paper helps too. Signaling. A lot of people won't think about this one, but if you're in a situation where you want to be found, things like flares or a mirror can be very helpful. Often with search and rescue or any type of emergency situations, there's going to be helicopters or planes or things above head. You can use signaling mirrors. This is actually tip and trick from Vietnam that people are still using right now, 2020, 2021, when they're in desert warfare. Okay. If you want to reach somebody in an airplane, the best way to do it is none other than a mirror. Okay. A signaling mirror. This will get the pilot will see the reflection. They can easily see it from thousands of feet in the air, as well as flares. And then finally, one of the most important things ever, and I'm going to share it right here on the screen, cash. Cash is king, baby. Don't ever leave the house without cash. We saw that when the internet went out, like Matt has already mentioned on the show. Okay. When the internet was gone, there was no ATMs. There was no debit cards. There's no MasterCard. There's no Amex. There's no Visa. What are you using? Well, you probably don't want to carry bricks of gold around with you. And actually, in fact, it's going to be hard to access your Bitcoin. So cash, people will value cash, right? Cash and other valuables that are compact. Like if I could trade somebody, say I got a $50,000 Rolex here, if I can give them that and they're willing to give me a car, something, that they don't see useful right now, sure, great trade. Okay, $5,000 car when you need it is better than a $50,000 watch telling you the goddamn time. So that's a lot of the stuff that I have in my go bag.
A couple quick things, Adam. I just wanted to build upon there.
Yep.
I'm just looking to find it right now. But in regards to Bitcoin, you could also have one of these, right? An open dime. And again, if it's unpunctured, as this one is, you can tell that no one's used it. So again, like there are ways that you could check the balance on this, even if telecommunications were to go down. So that's just kind of food for thought there. I don't think that people would be like, if you were trying to prepare for, if you believe like a serious collapse, things outside of cash, I think can still be a great store of value, like gold. Gold, like, while you probably can't carry your entire net worth in gold, if you're a rich person, having a small amount of it is useful. But again, even for individuals that are maybe less economically inclined or don't have the same sort of capital, like even things like junk silver, right? Like a
Yep.
lot of prepper books and stuff, if you get into that, junk silver is a very popular reoccurring theme. And so that's literally just any coinage from Canada or the United States pre 1964 will have a certain quantity of silver in them, right? So I think like pre 1964, it's like 90% is silver there. So again, after that, they replaced it all with is it nickel and steel or whatever. But yeah, so just kind of food for thought there too, guys. But cash is like, again, even just with what we experienced with the Interact going down, that was so powerful.
Yeah, extremely powerful and eye-opening. My argument against the junk silver and stuff is that your average person has no goddamn clue what they're looking at, but your average person does probably have resources you would want or need. And so that's why I think cash is still the most important, is because they'll understand the value of $100 bill, even if at the time, in a real chaos, your paper money is not gonna, like, it literally is worthless. Except for the idea that we could still barter it. Now, we are going over time here, so I appreciate all of you and your time, but I do think it's important still to cover the truck. And so truck, vehicle, the get home ban. And this is something I really think is important, okay? Because most of the time when shit happens, you're probably not at the house. Okay, I'm thinking snow and ice storms. I'm thinking lightning and windstorms and down power lines. I'm thinking power outages causing loss of visibility and traffic light functionality. I'm thinking you're out and about, daily routine, going to work, coming back from the daycare, grabbing groceries. You've got an inoperable vehicle with engine issues, out of fuel, flat tire, loss of power steering, stuck in the snow or in a ditch. You've got things like terrorism, right? We've seen bombs, we've seen 9/11, we've seen a lot of things stopping traffic, true gridlock traffic where you can't go anywhere, getting lost, or you don't have cell service, or like the other day when it just disappeared on everybody. And there's also a medical or family emergency. These are all things that can happen to you in your vehicle. And your vehicle, if we just change our framing of mind, can actually be your mobile command center. And I make a few arguments here that from a survival perspective, your vehicle is going to help you with a lot of things. It is locking doors that can slow down or deter robbery. Okay, it's got concealment in the trunk where people can't see through it at all. Or if you have tinted windows, you can often conceal your body or any valuables in there, especially with the use of a blanket or anything like that. You have cover from shrapnel and projectiles. And cover is not to say that your car is not bulletproof. Okay, it's probably aluminum if you're in North America, or steel. And if it's aluminum, like if somebody shoots at your car, chances are the bullet's going to go through, but it's going to get deflected as well as slowed down. And so it is actually decent cover. If it's not good cover, it's definitely good concealment. Remember, you don't want to be seen. You don't want to become a target. It's a heat source. Okay, if it's running, it can run heat. If it's not running, you can extract the fuel from it, right? A lot of cars actually now have anti-siphoning technology on them, so people can't siphon your fuel, but you can always get under the car, get to the fuel tank, puncture it. That won't cause it to explode, and drain the fuel out of it if you needed the fuel. It's a great power source when it's running. There's obviously a huge battery in there, and when it's running, you can plug all cars now have USB chargers and shit like that in them. It can hold hundreds of pounds of gear and supplies if necessary. Now, one of the things about that is, like, you don't want to be carrying more than what you can carry, because then it's kind of useless. But it is not a bad idea to have extras in your truck. Off-road capability in some cases. If you got a monster truck like mine, I don't need roads. Okay, I can go around the roads, or I can go over curbs and stuff like that. And so that makes it a decent thing to keep your mobility up. Escape and evasion means, right? If there's something going on and you're right in the thick of it, you can get the hell out of Dodge much faster in a vehicle, provided that it's not in a gridlock situation, etc., than you could on foot. And plus all the other benefits there. Offers radio for updates and messages if it's still operating. Bonus if you have CB radio or ham in there. It's grounded from electrical dangers like down power lines. And it's also a decent shelter from environment, right? Things like snow, ice, rain, even fire for a very limited amount of time. You could drive through some fire without having the immediate flame and heat that you would if you were not covered in that in it as shelter. So mobility equals survivability, but you still want to have these things prepared. So if all this shit's just laying around in your vehicle, it's far less accessible and far less useful to you than if it is organized and in a bag and you know where everything is, so that you can actually leave that vehicle and bring survivability with you. And so I think it's not enough to just have all this stuff laying around in your vehicle. I think it should also be in a bag and organized for actual portability. So emergency medical kit. Okay. And here you want to have stop the bleed. A popular thing you might want to consider these days is norepinephrine. Okay. So if people are running into some, what's that shit? Fentanyl. You can sort of bring them back to life with some norepinephrine and naloxone. EpiPen. So EpiPen's great. Again, allergic reactions, all sorts of things can be stopped dead in its tracks with EpiPens. Any type of prescriptions that are regular to you and your family, because if you have to get out of Dodge, you can't make it back to the house. Okay, the go bag for the vehicle, by the way, is either the get home or get the hell out of Dodge bag, right? So if you can't go back to the house, you want to have a lot of these things that would be redundantly already in your go bag, just in case you can't get there. So prescriptions, that's great. Lighters, multiple. Scissors, again, for cutting away any clothing or anything that we need to get out of the way if we need to provide first aid. Tourniquet. I have a tourniquet in my bag and in my truck always. So in my truck, when I open my door, it's attached to my actual seatbelt. So my back rear driver door, it's attached to the seatbelt. You can instantly pull it out. If somebody's really injured in a car accident or a shooting or something like that, you can save their life instantly. It takes minutes to bleed out from a gunshot wound to an artery, but you can save their life with a tourniquet. Water purification tablets with a bottle or vessel. Local and provincial / state maps, dehydrated meals with jet boil, personal protection. You take that however you want, and whatever your state or province allows you to do for that. Flashlight, rain gear, cold weather gear, gloves. Okay, gloves are great. If you need to break windows or do anything, you don't want to get cut, gloves can really help with that. Paracord, power bank. Okay, keep that phone charged if it's still useful. And if it's not, I do have rechargeable batteries in my 1,000 lumen flashlight as well that can be plugged into the power bank. Hatchet, fuel. Fuel is going to stay in the truck. You're not going to run away with the fuel, but things that you want in your vehicle just in case you need it. Tools specific to your vehicle, right? You've all had a flat tire, but do you know how to change that thing? Do you even have a tire iron? Does your jack work? Sometimes they're seized up. You haven't used it for years. Do you even know how to get to it in your car? Where is that thing? Recovery rope or chain. If you get stuck, decent thing to have to be able to get yourself out if there's somebody else there to help you, or you can have a mechanical winch. That's a great idea. Jumper cables or a jump start. They make really compact jump start things now that can start your vehicle for you. Tarp, flares, and of course, cash. So I recognize we went long here, and I could talk literally all day about this stuff because I'm really excited. And this is the hobby day, so it's like only things we're going to be super excited about. I'll try and be less superfluous on my next presentation, but I do believe that this stuff's important, and there may be things on here, and I hope there are things on here that you weren't thinking about that maybe now you're thinking about it and you're like, hey, you know what? I can spend a few bucks and go grab that, right? Tarp from the dollar store. It's like all this stuff is available to you. Some of it's more expensive than others, but like Matt said, and I think this is a really great point, something is going to be better than nothing, right? If you can't afford the lightest, warmest, most compact jacket, tent, whatever, that's okay. You can use what you have at home. But I think what the point is don't be trying to pack this when the emergency's happening. Don't be trying to decide what you need when your nervous system is trying to get you to run away and trying to block your decisions and just focus on your physical safety. Like it's it's going to be much harder to think. Okay. And you guys know this. If you've been in a car accident, if you've been in a real natural disaster, if you've ever been lost in the woods, your decision making gets thrown out the window. You become a freaking chimp. So pack this stuff beforehand, be prepared, and make sure you have a plan, right? Having a plan's the number one thing, and communicate that plan to the other people in your life that are part of that plan. Okay. If you have a plan, but your family doesn't know it, it's not a good plan. Okay. If you have an escape route or a bag and nobody knows how to use what's in that bag, including your other family members, it's not a good bag. It's not a good plan. So, just a few things to consider. And again, I apologize for going a little long on today's video, but Matt, any additional thoughts or closing thoughts you wanted to make on this?
Yeah, I always find this stuff fascinating. So again, really happy that we could put this together. For anyone that's interested in our Telegram chat, I actually just shared one of my favorite real life stories about someone surviving in a conflict zone. This one in particular relates to an individual that survived in a city during the 90s in Bosnia. So literally like no running water, no power, no food. And they talk about like how the barter economy became such a big thing. What really made me think about it was actually when you mentioned lighters, because that turned out to be one of the very like popular things to trade, right? It's like ammunition, lighters, and alcohol is kind of what he explores and discusses. And again, not that you need to be prepared for any and all inevitabilities, but honestly, literally even just listening to this or thinking about this for 5, 10, 20 minutes will put you in a better position than probably the average citizen. And it really is about trying to get that competitive edge in like a high stress situation. So yeah, love this stuff.
Awesome. Yeah, much appreciated. And yeah, the lighter thing's interesting. And there's a social phenomenon right now that much less people smoke. Okay. That
Yeah.
straight up affects how this works. Less people have lighters.
I shared it on social media like a year ago, but like I bought a couple cases of lighters, right? So I've got like 100 lighters in my pantry. Again, it's one of those things that like it's not going to go bad before I use it. I can slowly cycle through it. And if you found yourself in a shit hits the fan into the world as we know it situation, well, hey, you can use it for barter. You can use it personally, whatever the case may be. So again, it's the same idea as having like, you know, a week or a month's worth of dry stored food in your pantry.
I have something, and this can be a close off because I know we're really going over here. But final thing, just regarding lighters, because this is one of those random things that, like, if you're not thinking about it, you're just not going to be thinking about it. If you only have one lighter, and it's like straight up the only lighter that you have, it's basically your only means of creating fire in a survival situation. That's bad, obviously. But one of the things that people have encountered in hiking and outdoorsmanship and whatever is they have one lighter and it's in their pocket, right? Or it's in their bag. And the fuel gets depressed on it, right? You depress that little red button. If we're talking about a standard BIC here, you press the button, right? Fuel starts coming out. Well, if that butane exits the lighter, not very much use to you. And so do you know how to combat this, Matt?
Like I other than just like store it in a more proper fashion, no.
Okay, well, store it in a more proper fashion is probably not going to be applicable when you're panicking and trying to survive. So here's one thing you can do to take this into your control: an elastic band. Nobody knows this trick. It's freaking genius. Special operations guys are using this trick all around the world. You take an elastic band, you wrap it around the top of the lighter and put it under the red, the red button. I should have a lighter around here, but I don't. The red button that, you use to light the thing, put the elastic band under that. The button can't get depressed. You will have fuel in your lighter. Plus, you can use the elastic later for whatever the hell you need.
Gotcha. Or so you're wrapping it around the width, not the lengthwise. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah,
because
exactly.
The lengthwise would do the exact opposite.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I mean, you have to have some sort of brain here. But yeah, if you wrap an elastic band underneath that red button or the button that controls the fuel, you will absolutely be able to prevent that situation from happening. And again, what's an elastic going to cost you? I don't know. Buy some broccoli, comes with it. And you'll have a free elastic for your lighter so that you don't run out of butane before you need to use it. But again, we're getting crazy here. It's probably time for us to sign off. And tomorrow, Matt, what are we going to be talking about? Give us a little tease.
So yeah, tomorrow's Friday, so that's kind of our community day. So we'll do the first or the last 24 hours in the first half of the show, and then we'll be joined by our buddy Dan, the NFT boy, and we're going to be talking about our favorite concert experiences.
Awesome. Well, I'm really looking forward to that. And until tomorrow, you guys, I hope you're seeing that you can use some of this content. You can join our Substack. You can join the Telegram group. You can follow us on Rumble or YouTube, and just try and consume this content in order to get 1% better. That's what we're trying to do here. We're joining you on the journey, by the way. Everything that we're researching, all these talks, are in order to help us also get 1% better. And I think that's going to help us all to have the best day ever. And the best day ever, I do believe, includes, your friends, your family, your network, and those people around you. And I hope that today's talk kind of showed you a bit about that. So anyways, we'll see you guys tomorrow morning.
Thanks, guys.
They say life is what you make it. So what happens if you actually try? What if you actually tried to get your mind right? What if you actually tried to live the high life? What if you happen to die cause life is finite? What if you actually tried to live your best day ever? What if you actually tried to get your mind right? What if you actually tried to live the high life? What if you happen to die cause life is finite? What if you actually tried to live your best day ever? What if you actually grind out when the time's right? What if you actually blinded by your hindsight? What if you actually find out what defines life? What if you actually tried to live your best day ever? I'm getting 1% better every day. I'm getting 1% better every way. I'm waking up every day to a sunny day. No matter what the weather say, life is like a record, so just let it play.